All right, we can phase out our lo-fi and we'll kick it off. Hello, good morning, everyone, or whatever time zone you are in. I am very excited to start our program today. My name is Emily Badix. I use she, her pronouns, and I serve as the interim director of the Longmore Institute on Disability at San Francisco State University. I'm going to provide some access notes before we begin. If you'd like more personalized captions from stream text, you can access them at tinyurl.com/Longmore captions. So today's program is a Zoom webinar, so only our panelists are going to turn on their videos and use audio. We've turned off chat for sharing only critical links with you all. However, if you want this to be a more communal space, we would love that. You're welcome to use the Q&A room, just like it's a chat room. You don't just have to ask questions. You can just share reactions, share ideas, share thoughts. And you can also get tech assistance there. So let us know if you're having any troubles and we can support you there. Even if there isn't a lot of time for Q&A, we know our fellows would tremendously benefit from hearing your questions and reactions. So don't hesitate to be in that space. If that space is not accessible to you during the live program and you'd like to see what was happening there, you can access it later by emailing us at pklinst@sfsu.edu. After the event, we'll happily share it. So before we dive in, I want to express my gratitude to the Mellon Foundation, and in particular to our program officer, Carolyn Dinshaw, who made this program possible today, not just for 1 year, but as a 3-year initiative, which is just a beautiful opportunity to cultivate disability studies, both inside and outside of academia. This program started as a dream to try to replicate a model of something we had seen Paul Longmore do many, many years ago. And the cohort he established, I remember seeing at disability studies conferences for years and just being leaders in the field. And we dreamed for a bit that we'd be able to do something like that. And then the Mellon believed in that dream and made it possible. And we are so excited that today's program gets to show off these emerging leaders in our field who I have the utmost confidence are going to change the game in all the best, exciting ways. I have been extremely lucky to see this program thrive under the leadership of Alex Locust, the program director, and our newest hire, Lotus, who served as access coordinator for the intensive summer program. Going from Emerge as just a theoretical idea on a grant application to Emerge as a practice, as people who were brought together to thrive in the space, that was incredibly fortunate to get to witness. And it happened because of the beautiful skills and the care work of these two colleagues of mine. So I'm going to pass it to Lotus first. And once again, thank you all so much for letting me lurk in the background all day and get to hear these words of brilliance coming from our fellows. Thank you.
Good morning, afternoon, or evening, everyone. My name is Lotus. My pronouns are he, him, ze, zir, or they, them. Thank you so much, Emily, for that brief intro. I'll be brief as well, but I just wanted to say that it's truly been a dream job to support the Emerge Fellowship this year as the accessibility coordinator for the first time. As a disabled, neurodivergent, and chronically ill person myself, who is still very much recovering from academic burnout and disillusionment, programs like the Emerge Fellowship really do give me hope and have been so revolutionary to both witness and be a part of. I really cannot wait for you all in the audience to experience some of the groundbreaking research and projects that these incredible fellows have prepared for you. And I'm extremely grateful to Alex and Emily for their trust in me, as well as their endless support. So with that, I'll turn it over to my fearless and, dare I say, fabulous co-host, Alex Locust.
Thank you, Lotus. You may. uh, I want to say thank you to Lotus and Emily for setting the stage for today's event. As mentioned, my name is Alex Locust, and I am the program director for the Emerge Fellowship Program. Just catching up on my script here. To Emily and Lotus, I can confidently say that without your unwavering support, this year would not have been as seamless and adaptive as it was. Reflecting on last year's symposium, our keynote speaker, Imani Barbarin, offered us the wise concept of learning out loud. This invitation speaks to the importance of learning transparently, in community, and with humility, recognizing the value of shared growth, generative feedback, and collective healing, as opposed to antiquated norms rooted in independence, isolation, and that fun little pride shame spiral that I'm sure none of us have tangled with before, me especially. Building off of the gracious feedback that our first cohort gifted us with, we did our best to honor that labor and generosity by by significantly pivoting the program structure to match the input offered. This year, we emphasized the importance of promoting connection and community building within the cohort, and wow, did it pay off. Early on, this group had a playful refrain of the term interdependence, alluding to the disability justice principle and its relevance to their community building practices. Time and time again, I had the pleasure and privilege to witness this cohort show up for each other's needs with ease, care, and pleasure. In my movement work, I so often encounter huffing and puffing, eye rolling, and hand wringing in the face of promoting collective access. These 10 individuals met as strangers and in a short amount of time rallied behind the shared commitment of these values. As a queer, disabled person of color, serving in this role has been so healing and invigorating to steward this cohort through the intensive, given their commitment to the process and to each other. Today, I invite you to bask in the joyful radicalism that emanates from this group. Each fellow sharing their unique shine as an emerging scholar activist in the field of disability studies. We are going to be gifted with explorations across the expansive disability justice cosmos, ranging from the genesis of new frameworks to the righteous rage of spoken word poetry, to cross-disability panel discussions, and invaluably imperfect process reflections. Each one of these fellows dedicated a deep amount of work in the past month while juggling life outside of this intensive to invest in their projects and create something special to share with you all today. And these offerings are only just the beginning. If you see something that excites you today, we'll be sharing contact info throughout the symposium so that you can build community with these stars as well. Without further ado, let's get the show started. How will today go? Well, we've got 3 performance blocks with some juicy breaks in between. Myself and Lotus will be your co-MCs and moderators for today. So we will help guide us through each section. As a reminder, you are welcome to use the Q&A function to share your thoughts, questions, and affirmations throughout the program. Our fellows will let you know if they have capacity to juggle both presentation and responding live, or may opt to respond to your contributions after their block. So we invite you to be patient and understand the demand of juggling these tasks today. As always, a warm reminder to keep it cute, as my community says. Whatever you share in the Q&A feature should be in service to supporting the growth of these folks, projects, and journeys. Build up, don't break down. AKA, if you have feedback, make sure it's kind and generative. Up first, we have our performance, storytelling, and solidarity set. If Hedgen is ready, I will pass the mic to them. Then we will have Sabs, Jess, and Mick follow with their individual presentations, and then a group panel discussion before our first break. Without further ado, I will turn it over to Hedgen.
Hi, Alex, or thanks, Alex, for introducing us. Hi, everyone. My name is Hejin Kang. I use they and he pronouns. I'm a trans diasporic Korean with black hair, cut in a short mullet, and today I'm wearing a warm brown shirt with buttons. And in the background is my favorite lamp and my couch. So what I'll be presenting today is part of my proposed project, which is a multi-sensory zine, both physical and virtual, that maps out bodies through the practice of pantori. And I'll be explaining what pantori is as we move through my presentation. Over time, I'm hoping to offer hybrid pantori workshops to the community, as well as to add more interactive elements to the website and release a physical copy of these exercises in hopes that they can help guide other trans, diasporic, and disabled folks hoping to reconnect and remember bodies through their connections to land and spirit. I just want to be explicit. This is very much a work in progress. These are all things I've been navigating and exploring for the past 5+ years or so. And I'm really excited to be able to share these possibilities with you. And I invite any supportive feedback on what you'd like to see more of. I'm also experimenting with various access needs for this project, and it's definitely going to be far from perfect today. I want to name this, and I also would love to hear feedback on how I can continue to make things more accessible, especially as I move beyond spoken and written English language. So I'll start off by sharing this website, which you can follow along with. I don't know if one of the facilitators can put the link in the chat, or folks can see it, I guess. Yeah. Actually, would y'all mind if I shared the site so that I can interact with it? Cool. I'll do that. Okay. Okay, let's see. Okay, cool. Can everyone see my screen? Okay. Yes, okay. So this is the site, which is very much a work in progress. But the idea behind this was just to body map essentially, not just my body, but land as body, spirit as body, and also just the idea of diaspora and what that means in terms of framing it as a body. So yeah, the title of this is 숨소리, which means breath and sound, so the sound of breathing. And this is an extension of the idea of pansori, which I'll be explaining soon, or the practice of pansori. I'll start with the intro. So there are these little clickable buttons you can click. So the intro I've titled The Heart, visual description of the background. In the background is an overexposed pink and grief-hued film photo of an isolated shore on the seaside town of Samcheok on the east coast of Korea. The waves are visible from in between the two large rock formations, with haesong, which are sea pine trees native to this area, rising above. So I'll read what I've written here. I want to be explicit. I approach pansori as a political and spiritual practice. I reject the ideas of capital T tradition and mastery, which serve as colonial reflections of the origins of pansori, rooted in agrarian communities and shamanic rituals, practices of land and spirit. This is a living and breathing practice. I'm a living and breathing trans diasporic Korean and Crip being born and raised on occupied Tongva land, whose embodiments inform my practice. This resource came out of my need to share inaccessible ancestral and cultural practices with other...
Hedge, this is Emily. Just a quick access
Yes.
note to slow the pace for the reading, please.
Thank you for the reminder. So I think I was at with other disabled, poor, trans, and diasporic folks in an accessible way. This practice is distinct to each being that shapes it, to me, to you, to community, to land. I hope that through my particular lens, you can find an embodiment that resonates with you. I hope this can serve as a guide for you to explore your own relationships to bodies, land, spirit, and voice. So there's like a menu on the top left that people can access different parts through. The next part is titled pansori. The background description of this part of the site. In the background is a faded scan of a lino print, created after a visit to my father's hometown. The haesong sea pine tree is native to that particular area. Its dark bark color the result of humidity and the salty shore breeze. So I've written pan sori in Korean. And the way that I define pan is community, land, bodies, and being. And sori, which more generally means sound, I've defined as life, voice, drum, and embodiment. So to explain what pansori is, it's a Korean storytelling performance practice that consists of a singer, who's called a sorikun, and a drummer, who's called the kosu. This word stems from two characters, pan referring to a gathering of, and sori meaning sound, music, or voice. Pansori's exact origins are unclear, stemming from an amalgam of shamanism and folk performance through muga, which are shamanic songs, and as public entertainment by and for common folk. The stories told through these performances were passed down orally as generational knowledge, with traveling performers and regional mudang, Korean shamans, sharing stories in public spaces and small farming villages. The practice is very much orally and somatically shared, with each region of the peninsula having very different musical and narrative interpretations of these dominant stories. So this is a video of me performing, which I will briefly describe, and then if I could get support with somebody to play the video with captions, I'd appreciate that. So this clip is from the on and offline performance that my pansori teacher, Min Hae-sung, studio stages after every 상공부, which is an intensive practice study session in the countryside that usually takes place during the summer and winter seasons. where students showcase a new 대목, which is a musical piece or song they've learned in the past 2 to 4 weeks. So in this video, I sing a song from Hungboga, the story of Hungbo, where Hungbo and his wife break open the first 박, which means gourd, the title of which is 첫 박을 탄다, which means break open the first gourd. This particular part of the song is sung through the perspective of Hungbo, where him and his wife are starving and desperate for food. They find 3 gourds, the first of which they contemplate breaking open in their desperation. In this video, I am in front of a linen curtain backdrop with light filtering through the back. While I sing and narrate, I emphasize the mood of the song with a fan I hold in my hand. Not shown are the drummer, who is accompanying me, and the audience members, shouting 추임새, which are exclamations and sounds of encouragement and empathy for me, the singer, and the story I tell throughout my performance. And if I could get support with playing that video, should I stop share and then switch over?
그때요 홍모가 박 3통을 따라 놓고 우선 먼저 한 통을 타는 뒤
아이고
시리롱 시건 한거 주소 이겨 어루 한거 주소 이박을 하거들랑어 아무것도 나오지를 말고 바가통만 나오너라 평생어 보한 이로구나 두 당구여라 곱질이야
I actually think we can stop here. Yeah, I've been informed that I do not have much time left, so I will share a little bit more of the site. But it's open for, your perusal. It's not nearly done yet, but if folks want to check it out, it is live. So the other section that I've been able to put together so far is the voice, which relates to the idea of a marred throat that's particular to each pansori singer, and is why it creates a more rough guttural sound. There are a few diagrams on this page, and then the next section is, just my relationship to the water and to Korea, which is tied to my relationship to my father in his hometown. And this has like different quotes from what he said, and various different photos that I took of him and also his town of Samcheok. Yeah, I think I'm going to end it here. As I said, I invite any and all feedback, and feel free to reach out to me beyond this event as well. Thanks y'all so much.
Hello, my name is Sabrina Ali. I want to thank Hedge for that wonderful presentation and performance. So I am an Arab disabled queer woman. I use she, her pronouns, and I go by Sabs. For a visual description, I am a brown Arab woman with thick brown curly hair, a gold necklace that reads Sabrina in Arabic, and a black and white kufiyah from Lebanon. I am going to be doing a spoken word poem on mass disablement in Palestine. And I am going to share a link with a Google Doc of the lyrics in case that helps. I want to start off by giving a content warning. This includes settler colonial violence, white supremacy, ableism, eugenics, genocide, sexual violence, and incarceration. And this is heavy content that works to explicate mass disablement in Palestine, why Palestine is a disability justice issue, and it aims to take theoretically dense content and present it in a more digestible, accessible, condensed format of subversive art. And then I also want to give an audio warning. There is loud volume, shifting tone, quick pace, urgency, and emotive language that involves shouting. So I want to give folks the opportunity to step away for the next 8 minutes if anyone does not have space to experience this poem. And I want to give folks a moment to adjust their volume as needed. So yeah, feel free to absorb the poem in a way that's most accommodating to your body mind. There is also you can access this Google Doc if that helps with large font lyrics, but feel free to absorb it in a way that's most accessible to you. And then the last thing I want to note is acknowledgements. This poem is heavily in conversation with Jasbir Puar's Right to Maim and disability justice. And I'm honored to have Dr. Ardavan Gouadi providing an ASL interpretive performance of the poem. Okay, so we are going to start. Where you at, NPR? Or are you competing in mainstream media in linguistic gymnastics and repression of memoir? 24-year-old Palestinian with Down syndrome, Mohammed Bahar, was brutally attacked by an army dog of the Israeli occupation force. And of course, the IOF made Mohammed's family watch him get ripped apart without support. They left an intellectually disabled person to bleed to death without remorse. It's funny to me when people think an apartheid state would listen to the International Criminal Court when there's nonstop video footage of them sniping Palestinians for sport, carrying out eugenics through genocide as their last resort. So as a disabled person who is Phoenician, not cosplaying as indigenous to the region like certain Europeans who repeat what was done to them, call us children of darkness as if we are genetically demon. I want to start with Muhammad's story for a couple less obvious reasons. I want to point out why his story sparked moral outrage, prompted the public to engage, as if each and every other live-streamed Palestinian murder or maim was not just as illegitimate and just as inhumane. Our selective shock evidences faith in the IOF's humanity, despite over 50,000 civilians slain. Muhammad's story shows us that those who systematically uphold apartheid states will consistently commit violence against disabled people, and they'll do so with a smile on their face. And his story shows us that we view the intellectually disabled as uniquely innocent civilians, revealing a hierarchy of culpability that normalizes violence against certain Palestinians, where gender, disability, and age push violence against some into oblivion, everyday, quotidian. And I think we're asking this question kind of late, PM, post-meridian. But as a disability community, where is our collective rage toward the IOF intentionally disabling people? When will we acknowledge that manufacturing disability is just as ableist and just as evil? Mass disablement means medical supplies and assistive devices are considered contraband. They're literally illegal. Indiscriminately bombed, banned from aid trucks, that means no retrieval. The IOF blocks ambulances and limits fuel diesel, and intentionally bombs hospitals and healthcare workers like Hunger Games, the sequel. The IOF does not allow chemo or insulin, ventilators or generators. No antibiotics or anesthesia. Amputations are performed with only acetaminophen analgesia. The open-air prison in the Gaza Strip means the siege controls access to food, vitamins, protein. 1 in 3 toddlers are malnourished while the occupation culturally appropriates our cuisine. They control access to water, sewage treatment, and vaccines. They're out here revitalizing polio, BTS behind the scenes. They control mobility through checkpoints, so no, you cannot leave. Shatter children's bones, families, educations, and dreams. They control electricity, internet, and cell phone screens. Pay the algorithm to cover up their death camps and war machines. Videos of decapitated toddlers accompanied by screams. They withhold all resources, so Gazans are in a constant state of inflammation like arthritis. So at any point in time, the occupation can weaponize dependence to manufacture crisis. The occupation also produces disability to prevent capacity for future Palestinian resistance. They say, sit tight, obey. Don't fight, don't pray. I mean, you can, but we bombed your mosques, and good luck navigating roads filled with rubble and rocks. And they know that where we're from, no body mind is ever abandoned or left behind. Mad, divergent, ill, deaf, blind, no body mind is free until every body mind is free. We grow up living collective liberation and solidarity, practicing interdependence to an incomprehensible degree. So disabling one person strategically disables the entire community. And in other news of mass disablement not making it to NBC, we don't talk about the 10,000 Palestinian hostage detainees being tortured and raped with sharp hot metal objects per CCTV, while the IOF protests for their right to rape with impunity. That Palestine now has the largest ever population of pediatric amputees. That they drop white phosphorus on pregnant mothers, producing birth defects and deformity. I have a serious question for disabled people in the US. I want to know what you think about slow death. Disabling a population and then stripping them of access to the resources and assistive devices that are integral to making disability livable. To be honest, if I did not have my accommodations and assistive devices, I too would be miserable. Disabled Palestinians do not have access to beds, bathrooms, PT, OT, CBT, crutches, wheelchairs, hearing aids, canes, prosthetics. Where you at, bioethics? In our society, you must first be recognized as human before you can achieve rights. That means you must be a documented US citizen, economically privileged and/or white. Too often in the US disability community, we fail to acknowledge or disrupt violent systems that cause and produce disability. That includes white supremacy, capitalism, and militarized imperialism. Disability pride is not going to disrupt the system. So when we say no pride in genocide, we mean, how can we celebrate disability pride when our disabled kin are being eradicated through US-funded apartheid? So let us organize. Prevent manufactured disablement from being normalized. Do not begin a disability-focused event without first acknowledging active genocide. Our liberation is inextricable from theirs, in case you needed this incentivized. Let us disrupt complicit disability rights and disability studies spaces. Stop allowing institutions to use hollow land acknowledgements, performative phrases. Demand evidence that if offered the opportunity to colonize today, they would reject it in all cases. That means put their money where their mouth is, boycott, divest, and sanction. Let us demand our politicians support arms embargo, reject genocide as bare minimum. Connecting oppressions should be part of every curriculum. Let us wear our keffiyehs in solidarity against all forms of colonialism, no matter where you're from. Let us move collectively, because the more of us who speak, the safer we become. Thank you. Thank you for the ASL interpretive performance. And I'm going to pass it on.
Thank you, Sabs, for that powerful spoken poetry. Can y'all hear me okay? Take that as a yes. Please interrupt me if not. I'm going to share my screen. And just as for, I think, Alex taking time, I will probably need a couple of more minutes to be able to go through the audio description, if that's okay. Okay. Is the screen viewable?
Yes, it is. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning and afternoon. I'm Jess Martinez. I use they, them, ella pronouns. I'm a working class, queer, anti-binary, brown, Latinx, disabled, neurospicy femme with black hair tied into a bun. I'm wearing dangle earrings and a teal shirt with cutout patterns and a purple tank top showing underneath. Behind me is a brown wall with sunflowers, art, and picture frames around it. I was raised and continue to be raised in the USL. I'm a geography PhD candidate and women's studies certificate student at the University of Georgia. I'm coming to you from occupied Muskogee Creek and Cherokee lands, ancestral lands, currently, for now, called Athens, Georgia. Specifically, I'm in East Athens, which is a historically Black neighborhood that, like other places, is experiencing high rates of dispossession to create homes for predominantly white, affluent college students. So my project will be focusing on Athens, which is shown here on the map of Georgia in red. For context, most folks are familiar with Atlanta, and so the Atlanta region metro area is highlighted in green there. Some content notes before I continue. There's going to be a short video that comes after this presentation. Both this presentation and the video directly or indirectly discusses the following: ableism, housing insecurity, racial capitalism, settler colonialism, white supremacy, and other systemic oppressions. Please take a moment to take a break if that's what feels best, or throughout the presentation and video. The video I'm about to show you is part of a broader short film, a project based on my dissertation research that focuses on the intersections of immigrant, disability, and housing justice here in Athens, Georgia, and the activism of disabled Black and brown women here. And I've been working on this research for about five years. My project was originally going to be one of my dissertation chapters. I was imagining a non-traditional, mixed genre, and mixed media format. There's many reasons why I will not be presenting this initial project I proposed. Among them is my discipline's insistence of a dissertation that looks a certain way. But one that's been heavy on my mind for a very long time has been tied to this feeling of shame that I failed. And the video will talk a little bit more about that. So I've been very avoidant of my dissertation, and I haven't had much space to think about why am I so avoidant. So the video you're about to see is my first attempt at really thinking through this and showing kindness to myself. It's part of this broader idea of homing justice, which the video will talk a little bit more about. And for now, I wanted to uplift some of the thinkers who've helped me think about what home means. Among them is Bell Hooks and Yearning. She speaks of home place as resistance, especially for Black and women of color in the South. Gloria Anzaldúa and Borderlands La Frontera speaks of home in both the figurative and literal place of violence and liminality. And Eli Clare in Exile and Pride speaks of home to include relations to our own bodies and the beyond human realms. Yes.
So sorry. Just an access note. Do you mind speaking a little bit slower?
Yes. Thank you for that. Oh, and my dissertation title is influenced by all of these different thinkers, and it's still a work. Some audio descriptions before I show the video. I was talking to someone who lives in a place that doesn't have cicadas. So I realized, oh, cicadas are featured in the film. So I wanted to just describe what they are. This is an insect that's about the size of a thumb. And they are kind of like alien looking. They have fluorescent green coloring and yellow coloring and kind of clear wings. They vary in color. So this image is showing the adult cicada that's shed its exoskeleton, which is to its left, and it's kind of on a tree trunk. So cicadas in the film, they make kind of a rattlesnake sound. And so that's what will be heard in some of the scenes where I'm walking through a forest. And so apologies that the audio descriptions are not embedded in the video. It's my first video from beginning to completion. And so it's a goal of mine to embed audio descriptions for the one I'm going to show. That's part of the larger video. Sorry, I'm trying to look for my notes. Okay, so two of the main scenes that the video will show is one, it shows me walking through a forest. I'm walking on a red clay path, tending to look away from the camera. In the scenes, I'm wearing a yellow hat, a red and tan shirt, green pants, and black shoes. The other major scene is I'm sitting in my living room on a blue-gray high back chair, wearing a black t-shirt with a red flower that says land back and a bright pink. I'm wearing green pants and black slippers. There's a purple and tan table with picture frames, flowers, lamp, and other items. The camera angle switches from a shot of me directly speaking to the camera and to a shot of me showing me speaking to a second camera in the scene. There's broader transitions. Two of the main transitions that are reoccurring are showing me walking through the streets near my house in both the evening and nighttime. And it's showing me looking at this new student housing that's been constructed around me, and also either in front of or behind a locked fence that prevents trespass into a forested land. The second major scene, transition scene, is me speaking with a friend, either in his living room, where we sit next to each other on brown and gray couches, or outside his house, which is tan, with turquoise window shutters, and has steps. The friend is a brown man wearing a blue shirt and gray shorts. I'm wearing a teal and purple shirt with blue pants in that scene. And if you would like to follow along, the video transcript is on this QR code, and it has more specific and detailed audio descriptions on the bottom of the transcript. So I'll take a moment for folks to take that. Please let me know if that leads you to the transcript, and I am ready for the video to be shown, please.
The reason why I chose film is because I very often am in the background. I enjoy being in the background. It's a really cool position to be in because like you get to hear everything, nobody suspects you. You're just there and you're living life and you hear stories, and that's part of storytelling. And so this is me taking up more space and honoring my own self-story. It's my attempt of restoring the self. And so this project is about homing justice, and that's my play on housing justice, but instead it's looking at what are the relations of home. And so by home, I mean relations to bodies, relation to land, relation to other beings, human and non-human, on top of an actual dwelling. And so I think about homing justice and how these various systems fragment the self, and thinking through what does it mean to heal. In February 2021, residents of a predominantly Latinx Spanish-speaking mobile home community received notices that they needed to move their mobile homes within 6 months because the land was being purchased.
Buenos días, amigos y amigas de Dignidad Inmigrante. Estamos aquí en las trailas de Tranquility.
The two leaders in that particular campaign from Dignidad Inmigrante in Athens, or DIA, were already maxed out, and they asked me to take on more of a role of what do we need to get in order to help facilitate this process. So I put out a call on Instagram. I was like, okay, here's a Zoom link. I'm calling for people, anyone in Athens who are interested in resolving this particular housing crisis. And folks showed up on the Zoom call. They were the right people.
Affordable housing!
When do we want it?
Yesterday!
What do we want?
Affordable housing!
When do we want it?
Yesterday!
They were the ones who made this group possible and the magic happen. So Tranquility Campaign really sparked this fire in me of I can't just think about theory, a housing theory. I need to do something with it. And so through the collective group that showed up and some of the DIA leaders with the Tranquility Campaign, the Athens Housing Advocacy Team, or AHAT, was formed.
Housing is a human right, and everybody deserves fair, affordable housing and decent housing. Amen. Yeah, man.
Resource sharing, different people in different networks, in different organizations, sharing what was going on that isn't shared to the rest of Athens, and then finding ways we could support each other. So that was what AHAD did the first year. But it wasn't until 2022 in August that it really coalesced into a larger group who would consistently show up, and that was in response to the most recent crisis, which is when Prosperity Capital Partners, or PCP, an out-of-state investor from Florida, purchased the last remaining affordable units in Athens, about 800 units.
The thing is about the situation is, Election High, I've been over here 22 years.
That really activated a lot of folks because it was affecting a large part of Athens. We gathered in East Athens in a place called the Resource Center. And the first night we had, I think it was 40 people. It was during these broader meetings that I started thinking about cross-movement organizing, because there were multiple complexes represented in those meetings, except for the predominantly Latinx Spanish-speaking community, Rosemary Place. And that was really difficult to navigate as someone who tends to think about community kind of very idealistically, and that it felt that there was your struggle or your campaign and us over here with our campaign and our struggle.
As tenants, we have come together and agreed to issue the following demands.
In the peak of AHAT organizing, we were able to successfully create a mutual aid fund, and it was really magical because folks were experiencing mass evictions, and in many cases a lot of folks only needed just a couple $100s to prevent their eviction. We were able to meet those needs within hours of posting that ask, and that feels really good to be a part of that, because it relied on so many different people in order to make that happen. And we were able to raise funds to cover people's medications. We were able to help folks impacted by the Prosperity Capital Partners buyout with physically moving their belongings. I don't remember anyone talking about being disabled, but how disability was really at the core of the PCP campaign. The folks, the tenants who were most impacted, who were leading the tenant meetings and showing up at demonstrations and talking and sharing their stories and demanding accountability from commissioners and the mayor, were disabled Black women. Folks couldn't find alternative housing because there's no elevator, because there's no AC, because there's black mold, because there's steps. The disability at the core was clear when I realized how invisible it was. The words won't come out the way I want them to come out. I think I need to pause. I was being hard on myself for not saying the things that I want to say in the way that I want to say them. And I was reminded that I am, in fact, a professional listener, which I appreciated. So I've assumed the more comfortable vibe position. The Prosperity Capital Partners campaign was also where I was experiencing more constant pain and figuring out, okay, what do I need to do to attend to my body needs after ignoring them for so long? So I stopped facilitating meetings and I stopped showing up for particular demonstrations where it would be hard to stand for multiple hours or it wouldn't feel good at the current moment. And I feel responsible for the dwindling of AHAT. It's not active anymore other than a signal group at the moment. That sense of failure feeds into this sense of shame of I was one of the main facilitators, and as my body mind changed over time, I was no longer able to take on those roles. It's only until recently that through reading a lot of crypt theory, I've come to understand failure in a different way. Like, redefining failure is really hard for me at this moment. So what I've come to realize is that this notion of failure versus success is yet another binary that entraps us into these modes of what capitalism values. There's the increase in land speculation that exacerbates the housing crisis. There's environmental crisis. There's genocide. To protect private property means a whole system of disablement. So this whole filming of self has been a way of recognizing my own wholeness and also the wholeness of the self as a place worthy of fighting for its liberation. Home is rootedness in place, forming relations with land, building relations with each other through coming to feel more whole. It has helped me create different narratives and that restoring the self. The oppression isn't all there is. There's badass people who are working underground and doing the unexpected in ways that will never be documented, but that build powerful movements.
Trabaja todo el día. El patrón le ha robado dinero y alegría, sí. María está llorando.
You are, yep.
Thank you. Thank you everyone for watching. I will pass it on to Mick.
Hi, everyone. I have some slides that I'm going to share. Just bear with me for a moment. Okay, can everybody see that? All right, great. So I've been working on a graphic memoir called Things Doctors Have Said to Me in Real Life. And I wanted to share a bit of that with you. On this page, there's a little cartoon head of me who's white with short brown hair and dimples. And give me just 1 second. I'm going to pin the interpreter for myself in another place so that I can make sure that I'm not going too fast. Okay, so a few content notes, some broad topics that I'm going to touch on today are ableism and other systemic oppressions, medical trauma, body size, and food issues. Please take a break if you need to. A little about me. I'm queer, non-binary, fat, white, and chronically ill. I'm a radical full spectrum doula, which means that I support people who are giving birth, having abortions, and experiencing a loss like stillbirth. And I'm also sometimes called a disability doula. So I support disabled people. One of the ways that I support newly disabled people is through my zines. And I've also facilitated workshops on media activism, the intersection of disability justice and reproductive justice, creating screen reader accessible zines, and more. So a few of my zines, because much of my scholar activism has been around zines. On the screen here, we have 3 images of 3 of my zines, the covers of 3 of my zines. The first is a pocket guide to medical self-advocacy, tips to help yourself at the doctor or hospital. The next is let me know if there's anything I can do, how to offer your disabled pal help that is specific and useful. And the third is a disability manifesto, thoughts on crip value in a capitalist land. A couple of zines that I've contributed to or helped to edit. This is DIY doula, self-care for before, during, and after your abortion, which I did with the Doula Project. You can get that as a free PDF download. And coming soon is My Choice Always in All Ways, and that's a zine about abortion for trans and non-binary folks. So a synopsis of my graphic memoir, it tells stories of medical trauma and implicit bias, especially anti-fat bias, as I navigate healthcare systems. The apex of the memoir is a time when I should have sought emergency care, but instead I risked my life because of all the previous times that my symptoms were dismissed. So in these pages, I was referred to an endocrinologist because I'd had hair loss that worried my other doctors. I specifically asked to see a provider who wasn't fat phobic, but immediately she ignored what I came in for and recommended medications for a presumptive diagnosis of prediabetes. She hadn't reviewed any labs. She was basing this just on how my body looked. So these are only a few pages from this story. It was difficult to choose samples that showed the complexities of these topics and did justice to the intersectional depth I aim to encompass in the full 200+ page book. And just a note on the image descriptions that are following, all of the following images are single comic panels in grayscale. All of the text is hand lettered. Some is highly decorative. And Mick is a recurring character who is fat and white with short, messy hair. So on this page, we have an image of Mick looking concerned and a doctor who says, well, I'm not just testing your blood sugar, I'm going to test your A1C, which looks at your blood sugar for 3 months. And the next image shows a top-down view of the doctor who looks angry and a bit evil, and large text reads, because your red blood cells remember. The next panel has a caption that reads, she said this in such a strange, accusatory way. The image shows a large red blood cell with a face towering over a small Mick with mouth agape. The red blood cell says, Mick ate a slice of cake at a party June 20th with ice cream. The caption reads, like my red blood cells would be reporting on what she perceived as bad behavior. So spoiler alert, since we're skipping some pages, my labs were normal. I wasn't diabetic. The doctor never acknowledged her assumptions or the issue that I came in for, except to dismiss it as just stress, the same way that I and so many others have been told we're just anxious or hysterical. She made me feel a lot of shame. So later, I talked with a friend about the experience. So this panel has two figures, Mick and a friend, sitting in silhouette. Mick says, some people who get treated like that probably wouldn't go back to her. Then they're walking around without treatment because of shitty bedside manner. The next panel, Mick continues, she didn't dig into any of the lived socioeconomic or cultural issues that can impact a person's health, like distrust of providers, income and resources, time and energy factors that are less available if you're disabled or caretaking or working multiple jobs to survive. There's a speech bubble pointing off panel that says it also leaves out that for disabled folks, being healthy may never be attainable, and striving for perfect health is rooted in ableism. So the next panel has a caption that reads, at the time, I couldn't have necessarily articulated something like, but the so-called social determinants of health are beside the point. However, I did know, and there's a large speech bubble that reads, everyone deserves good health care. Mick has their hands raised to accentuate the point. A smaller speech bubble reads, period, not just for those who can perform health. In the next panel, Mick continues the conversation with the friend. Bias in medical settings, whether it's related to racism, ableism, transphobia, anti-fat bias, etc., can result in injury or even death. There's plenty of research. And the next panel, Mick's friend says, looking bummed, so it's not just hurt feelings. And in the next panel, Mick replies, it's not just hurt feelings. So if you'd like to see more, the full comic essay is going to be available for free on Patreon later in the fall. I'm also going to have an accompanying panel by panel image descriptions like you saw here, and that'll be included for greater access for screen reader users. So you can scan that QR code, or I think Lotus is helping out with putting that in the chat. Or if you'd like to access any of those zines, including the one that's available as a free download, that's all in that website at that link there. And I think that now I'm going to pass it back to Alex maybe for the panel. And thank you so much, interpreter.
Thank you, Mick. That was such a treat to get to see that preview and preview of your work, and just from all of you. Those stories are, yeah, I'm like lit up over here. So what I would love to extend to Hedgen, Jess, Mick, and Sabs to start off is this question around storytelling, right? What inspires your storytelling, and why do we tell our stories? If any one of you would like to respond to that, I can also paste it in the chat so you have it. So what inspires your storytelling, and why do we tell our stories?
Yeah, so one of the big things for me, this is Mick speaking, zines are a way that you can create your own media when the mass media is not like giving you the opportunity to have your voice heard. It's a great way for marginalized folks to self-publish and to communicate with each other. And for me, storytelling is not just about the wanting to have other people know what I was going through. It's also about that I've gone through some of these experiences. I've figured out some coping tools. I've figured out some tricks that I don't think that other people should have to start from scratch with. And I really want in this memoir to demonstrate, like in those last panels, that these experiences are more than just hurt feelings, right? Like systemic bias impacts our care. And so it's really important that we can not just share experiences to have these stories told, but so that we can support each other and help each other get the things that we need. I'll pass it to Hedge.
Yeah, I think, also what Mick said about like zines and accessibility, I think that was really core to the storytelling and work I want to do and continue doing. I think especially because, yeah, I didn't mention this during my presentation, but I also, what's core to my life is organizing here in Los Angeles, particularly Koreatown, and just, yeah, rebuilding and reconnecting to land, especially in an area in a neighborhood that has like little to no green space, and also has a large population of unhoused folks. So yeah, just like keeping all of that in mind of like who I want to center, who I want to build with, and why I'm doing this.
This is Sab speaking. Yeah, just real quick, I definitely agree with what Mick said about like sidestepping gatekeepers who control whose stories are allowed to be told and whose aren't. And then I think like storytelling is important because it allows you to feel and connect and humanize on a visceral level to systemic injustices that can kind of feel distant to us if we have not personally experienced them. So yeah, my connection with storytelling.
This is Jess speaking. I wanted to build off of Hedge's comment about commitment to place. I'm a geographer, and so space and place really, I nerd out on it. And so storytelling for me most recently has been about wanting to kind of reject the representations of place as being this one thing. And so that has always been hard for me to see different representations of the South in general. And so wanting to tell the different stories that the colonizers and the oppressors don't write because it threatens the way it threatens these powers of like that nothing can ever change and that we don't have any power. And so storytelling for me most recently has been about telling different stories to highlight that there is power and there is resistance, maybe not in the ways that are most documented or most kind of visible, and then also finding ways to really think about how my own experiences and histories are part of that broader storytelling. I'm done speaking.
Thank you, Jess. This is Alex speaking. I'd love to build on what you were sharing around anti-colonial practices, and would love to hear, I know Hedgen mentioned being down to tag in. Like, it seems like storytelling can be a vehicle based on everything that you all just shared to be like a medicine for anti-oppression, right? Or a tool to add into your toolkit. So just curious, like, in what ways do you think storytelling can move disability justice forward, be anti-colonial, right? Whatever you are seeking to use storytelling for, how can that be a vehicle for that?
This is Hedgen speaking. Thank you, Alex, for laying that groundwork. I think, tagging off of what Jess said, and, what the group has been talking about as a whole, just like centering what is anti-colonial and moving away from like dominant forms of language, like English, for example, or like using that as like the main vehicle to storytell. I think that's something I've been trying to move away from, and why I was so drawn to Pantori, because it's a storytelling form that, if anything, focuses more on embodiment and sound more than the language itself. And the embodiment and the sound is the language. So I think that's something I feel is moving disability justice forward, as someone who frequently goes nonverbal due to chronic pain or to being neurodivergent, and also can't name a lot of my feelings and grief around disconnection to land and disconnection to like other relationships, whether it be human or non-human. And that's something I'm continuing to explore, and like I think is a valid form of storytelling, even if we're told, especially in institutions like academia, that they aren't valid. And I'm done speaking.
This is Dab speaking. Yeah, I would add to that. I definitely love the way that storytelling can honor like anti-colonial practices. And then also I think storytelling can change people. So like after interacting with a story, you can come out differently than when you entered, like before hearing the story. So I think it can be helpful in moving disability justice forward, particularly in moving beyond disability rights and relying on policy that often leave out certain marginalized communities. But yeah.
Saps, if you would, this is Alex speaking. If you'd indulge me on something a little on the spot, it's okay if you want to pass, but I really appreciated your share in the intensive around your research on like the science behind empathy and storytelling. That feels really relevant to what you're sharing. Are you open to giving like a very high level tease for the audience?
Yeah, this is Sab speaking. So I study the use of spoken word poetry as a form of critical narrative pedagogy to educate nursing students about ableism, disability, and disability justice. And yeah, spoken word poetry is like one of many forms of subversive art. So I really liked how our panel kind of brought together like all of these different formats of storytelling. And how like each person can connect to a modality of storytelling over other modalities. So, but yeah, working through empathy and active listening, and like centering multiply marginalized identities. There's a lot of benefit in incorporating storytelling and anti-colonial storytelling, particularly into more like education. So yeah, I could talk a ton about that, but I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Saps. Mick or Jess, is there anything that you'd like to add?
This is Mick speaking. I think I agree with Sabs about how it's so cool that we've each got these different modalities that we're using, to bring forward these stories. I think in terms of the disability justice framework, there's something in the recognizing wholeness. We're thinking about sharing our life experiences, and that is inclusive of how disability relates to our lives, but also like all of these other pieces of ourselves as well. And also with collective access, right? Like, I think if you were to interact with a lot of storytelling in other places, it might not be as accessible as the way that we're trying to present it here. When I first started making zines, I saw them as a very physical medium because they're usually printed, they're usually, something that you get a physical copy of. But during the pandemic, I started to think about them as something that I could offer digitally because we weren't going to zine fests and things like that. And that's when I started to think about, well, why am I not offering screen reader accessible zines? And that is what, transformed my comics as well into how can I make my comics accessible? I can create this system of like, panel by panel descriptions, which I know that Emily and other people are doing as well. And that's also like using storytelling for collective access. And even just modeling this for other people that are reading our stories and, accessing Jess's video to see like these descriptions and things that are added to the video are things that people might think, oh, maybe that's something that I can offer when I start to tell my story as well, which creates greater accessibility as a whole. I'm done speaking.
This is Jess speaking. Just wanted to echo what folks have said already. And then also going back to this like anti-colonial piece of the way that at least I've been conditioned to acknowledge storytelling is very much like verbal based, and kind of my problem with how performativity, especially if you are like an academic, is that you are an eloquent speaker and that you can answer questions and be able to explain very theoretical things to people like on the spot. And so for me, film has been a way to figure out how to tell a story, still kind of verbally, and trying to think of how to move away from kind of like verbal based storytelling, but also taking my time to think about, well, what is it that I want to tell? And how do I want to show that in a way that I feel academia hasn't allowed me to do. So that's been one way for me to kind of break beyond what is considered dominant ways of storytelling. I'm done speaking.
This is Alex and Jess. I'm not sure if you saw it in the chat, so I'll read it aloud. I want to see if you're down to take the next question, and if you would like to pass to another panelist, you don't have to be the first one to go, but part of your video inspired me to invite this question, right? I really loved your personal reflection of the difference between being someone who typically is behind the scenes versus moving forward and taking up space. And so just in all of your work, I'm seeing a duality of, and by all of you, I mean the panel and the fellows in this cohort, but I'm noticing a duality or dance of centering the self and inviting reflections on broader collective experiences. Can you share a little about navigating that balance of when to own your story and when to zoom out to the bigger picture?
This is Jess speaking. Thank you for that question, Alex. I struggle with it a lot. The first draft of this film wasn't centering me. It was me in conversation with a very dear activist friend who was one of the main people who took me under his wing to teach me the ways of how to be an organizer. And so it was more so me in conversation and also spotlighting the work of the groups I've been working with. But so I struggle with, well, when do I talk too much about it? But then my partner was like, you don't talk about yourself anyway. And so you don't need to have that problem. And so I just, to me, it's like something about intimacy that's like a broader thing, but like, I guess I try to take backstage so that I'm not taking up too much space, because I always fear that I'm going to take up all the space, which is interesting. So thus I take the extreme and take no space. So for me, I think about the main way I have come to know what like I learned in academia about theory of like, what is capitalism, what is this possession, didn't really make sense to me until I thought about my own life. And so thinking about like a lot of feminist thinking of the personal as political, or Shari Moraga has this theory of like theories of the flesh. And so like what I've learned from a lot of Black and Indigenous women of color thinkers has been the centering of your own embodied knowledge and experience is a way of theorizing, and it's a way of thinking about what does liberation look like in terms of like thinking about broader systems kind of zoomed out. What does it mean to zoom it in a way that's very intimate, that's bringing other folks into like your inner deepest kind of insecurities. And so I guess, yes, that's the way I've been thinking about it. Yeah, that's it for now. I'm done speaking.
This is Hudson speaking. I think just to respond to what Jess just shared, I definitely struggle with the same thing. And I think for me, it always comes down to a balance between like intimacy and also me not wanting to be perceived. And I think that's something we've talked about in the cohort a lot. And yeah, I think it's for me, it's always boiled down to, okay, what about me could and would I share in a way that would be helpful to the collective? And I think that's what really grounds me. I think that's why, I'm with this project, I'm like laying down Pansori as sort of like a framework, or my relationship to Pansori land as a framework, for other folks to like explore their own relationships to like diaspora and their body, and to gender, and to land. And that's my hope moving forward, not just with this project, but with organizing and with building community, is to continue to build those relationships, to land and to body. And I think that's what really guides me more than anything else, versus like a focus on the self versus community. I think by zooming out on the larger picture of land and body and our relationships to all of this, and just community and like the ecosystems and the webs that are required for us to sustain ourselves, especially as disabled folks. Yeah, how can I continue building that? How can I continue expanding that? And how can we sustain that? I think are the questions I always ask. Also, like less so about having to speak as much and more so like a focus on listening, which I feel like isn't focused, or like at least in institutional settings isn't as focused as much. And I'm done speaking.
This is Mick speaking. I think I'm working in memoir, so it is quite focused on self. But when I have shared this work with others, they have told me that they've really related and that they really feel seen by what I'm sharing. So that feels important, because a lot of this is very vulnerable. The others have mentioned this intimacy of being seen, and being perceived, especially in these ways that we don't always share with everyone. And some people who are hearing our stories might not have others in their lives who have shared those very vulnerable experiences with them. And this might be an opportunity for them to have that opportunity to see that. In terms of the duality for myself, I also know that my experiences as a doula and the things that I have witnessed in supporting people, especially supporting folks who are marginalized in ways that I'm not, as well as my experiences with being in community with disabled folks. Those have all shaped how I interact in these healthcare settings. They've shaped how I advocate for myself, and they've shaped how I support others. So I think that it's definitely a balance, but I think that seeing both the zoomed in and the zoomed out can be really helpful for people in terms of when we tell our stories. I'm done speaking.
This is Sab speaking. Yeah, so I think this is a really good question. I usually, within spoken word poetry, I usually prefer to focus on personal stories and using them to make clear connections to like really large systemic issues. And I do have personal stories related to the settler colonial violence I was describing. For this poem, I decided to zoom out and center on the bigger picture. And I did that intentionally because of how little political education is taking place on transnational colonialism within the US disability community. So I wanted this to be like a really explicit, like this is everything that's happening and this is what we're not talking about. and how it impacts everyone in the disability community here. But yeah, I definitely would do a separate poem on my personal experience with it, and making those connections kind of like you will make the connections to your own personal lived experience and how they are really broad issues. And then, yeah, I love what everyone has mentioned about how theory can stem from lived experience, and like making things subjective, like incorporating lived experience is so central to disability studies and disability justice. So yeah, I'm done speaking.
This is Alex speaking. Yeah, Sabs, I felt the cross disability solidarity in your piece was very palpable. You know, as an amputee, it speaks to me very deeply, and I appreciate what you and Jess McHedge, you all offer, that collective care, that pursuit of collective liberation and solidarity feels very genuine, right? And does not tap into performativity or the, like, you know, allyship card that a lot of people out here are so hungry for. On that spicy note, I would love to invite each of you to offer any kind of closing statement or thought that you would like to wrap this panel up with. And once the last person shares, we will go to break.
This is Hudson speaking. I can go first. I think I just want to share my gratitude for, holding space for us and for the folks that came through. Yeah, I'm just excited to continue sharing the work that I do alongside like the other amazing fellows. Um, and yeah, like feel free to reach out. I want to hear all the feedback. I want to hear what folks want. This is not an isolated project. And I'm done speaking.
This is Mick speaking. I also am so grateful to everyone. I would also love to hear any feedback that folks have. But I also want to say, in terms of, I think sometimes when you're on a panel like this, you have a sense of authority or leadership. And, I am so emphatic that anyone can make a zine, anyone can tell their stories. Zines are a great way to do that if you feel like you're lost in terms of you have something you want to say, and you don't know a medium to do it. Zines are the perfect outlet. You don't have to be a designer. You don't have to know how to draw. So I would just encourage anybody that has something that they want to share, whether it's a personal story or something that's more politically motivated, like you can do it. Like we want to hear your stories. So yeah, that's all I want to kind of get that. That's kind of the foundation of every zine workshop I do, is like anybody can make a zine. And I'm done speaking. Thanks for being here.
This is Sab speaking. Yeah, I want to echo gratitude. I feel really grateful for this space and the resources to navigate increasing access in the discipline of spoken word poetry. I think spoken word poetry is really inherently accommodating because of its multisensory nature, with tapping into voice, visuals, and like haptics of feeling. But like really working on increasing access and navigating like ASL interpretive performance is exciting to me. So yeah, I would be so grateful to hear any feedback about that angle as well. And thankful to be here.
This is Jess speaking. Wanted to send a love note to all of y'all, Emerge folks. Y'all have been part of making my way home to myself, so thank you. And to everyone who came to attend, thank you for being here and for witnessing this crypt magic. I'm done speaking, passing it on to Alex.
Thank you, Jess. Yeah, you all have modeled the power of speaking your truth, of telling your story. I can personally vouch, mixed zine making workshop, we just got a little taste of it, and I've never even felt called to make a zine, and now I'm like, I don't know, maybe I'll think about it. So just grateful for you all being courageous and going first today and setting the tone. I know that's not easy, so I appreciate that.
Welcome back, everyone. This is Lotus speaking again. I hope everyone's breaks were everything that they needed them to be. We are going to move right along with our next content block in the symposium. And the unifying theme of the next two presentations is bodily autonomy and liberation analysis. So we will see two individual presentations. The first one will be from Ruben Cha-Analp, and then the next one will be from Mikey Mercedes. And they will give about a 10-minute presentation, and then we will also have about a 10-minute Q&A portion. So if you have any questions you'd like to ask our incredible fellows and panelists, you may do so using the Q&A portion in the Zoom chat. And just another reminder that thank you, Shayna, just put in the chat. If you are just coming in right now, there is a more customizable, reliable captions at tinyurl.com/long-of-more-captions. So you can see that in the chat and also the documentation of the previous FAQs. And, oh, excuse me, we will actually have Mikey Mercedes be the first presenter, and then we will hear from Ruben. So is Mikey ready to go?
This is Mikey. I am ready.
All right, Mikey, take it away.
Perfect. Let me just screen share real quick. Okay. Y'all see that, right? It says something's going wrong. Okay, hold on. Reload this. Perfect. Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Marcus L. Mercedes, but I go by Mikey. I am very pleased to finally be here at the symposium to cap off an incredible month alongside my cohort of wonderful Emerge Fellows. My presentation is going to be a brief, so brief, too brief, discussion of some earlier analysis from my project that I proposed for the summer, which is really centered around cross-movement solidarities and learning, specifically between disability justice and fat activism. For some context, most of my work really focuses on examining science and research as things that create and perpetuate oppression for fat, Black, disabled, poor folks who have never not been pathologized through the work of health, wellness, and medical authorities. I've identified myself as a fat activist in the past, although I have very strong feelings about that title, partly because I think activism is work that anyone and everyone should take up in service of a better world, but also because fat activism is plagued by all kinds of deeply rooted issues, including anti-Blackness, tokenization, ableism, missing stares, reverence of desirability or folks who are desirable, and also centering of the individual self over challenging roots of oppression. But despite that, this project really draws on my connection to fat activism, including my criticisms of it, and the kinds of lessons that fat activism should be taking from disability justice. So let's get started. You might ask, why put fat activism and disability justice in conversation with one another? Beyond just the fact that anti-fatness and ableism feed into each other and operate together and with other oppressions, my desire to put them in conversation with each other really stems from my observation that fat activism is currently being mainstreamed. And within that mainstreaming, a rights-based approach is being centered and amplified to the detriment of multiply marginalized fat folks who face the brunt of anti-fatness as it exists with other oppressions. To me, the current movement, the current moment of fat activism and the history of the disability rights movement have many of the same problems, and these are just a few. So one, people most affected by oppression are left behind or made invisible by how oppression is understood, discussed, and also organized around. For example, non-white, not cis, not straight people were forced to leave their other marginalized positions behind to find belonging within disability rights spaces, as well as deal with discrimination and violent behavior from those who are supposed to be their comrades against ableism. And the same happens in fat activism, where Black, Indigenous, and other racialized folks, and also disabled folks, and the specific ways that we experience anti-fatness, those are ignored, except for when we can be tokenized. There's also a problem of elevation of institutional solutions from career-driven figures. The official record of disability rights is disproportionately centered around 504 and the ADA and the activities and priorities of white professional class folks, including disability studies academics. And fat activism is steadily developing in this direction as well, as the mainstreaming of the movement presents career opportunities. The current focus is almost exclusively legal protections and awareness raising without goals beyond that. The National Association to Advance Fat Acceptance, which is kind of seen as the official fat activism organization, is currently working with Dove, a major corporation, to push anti-discrimination law in several cities. And I cannot think of anything more counterproductive than allowing a major corporate entity to attach itself to what is supposed to be an anti-capitalist struggle. And then there's also the desire to be accepted or assimilated into existing hierarchies, and that desire outweighs the desire to destroy hierarchies. And this is a tale as old as time. Often, marginalized people in movements become more concerned with securing protections for themselves instead of making it so no one needs protections. And in disability rights, we can sort of see that illustrated in the focus on legal protections, as well as the centering of folks with certain kinds of disabilities like mobility impairments or certain visible disabilities over others. And in fat activism, the fatter you are, the more disabled you are, the less likely you are to be served by how most folks challenge anti-fatness, especially when you consider that one of the main ways people challenge anti-fatness is to say, well, fat people can be healthy too. Not all fat people are unhealthy. ultimately, this doesn't do anything but maintain health-related hierarchies. Now, I know I just said a lot, but I want to make clear that I really think fat activism needs to take cues from disability justice in order to begin to address some of the harm that has occurred and will only worsen once the fat rights approach, to make a parallel to the disability rights approach, becomes fully mainstreamed. So, to get into my project, I've spent the past month reading books and essays and transcripts from or about folks in disability justice spaces to explore their experiences and also their criticisms of the disability rights approach. And in exploring those criticisms and experiences, the goal is to better understand the issues with rights-centered approaches. My intention is not so much to make a case against pursuing legal protections, but to complicate the narrative about how activism is done, what real activism, quote unquote, real activism should look like, and also to give other folks the language to think more deeply about the cost of letting institutions or less vulnerable folks dictate how we, quote unquote, get free. So for this presentation, I wanted to focus on one specific theme, specifically the issue of under-enforcement of the Americans with Disabilities Act, or the ADA. And because it came up a lot in my reading of these accounts. And I know that doesn't come as a surprise to anyone here, but the issue of under-enforcement is one that I have not seen engaged by fat activists who spend their time advocating for legal protections, besides what usually amounts to nothing is perfect. And I think it has very interesting implications in the context of fatness. So I wanted to focus on it here. The next three slides, will present two different passages from the Disability Visibility Project's ADA 30 in Color, which is a series of original essays on the past, present, and future of disability rights and justice by writers of color. And these passages are meant to show different discussions of under-enforcement of the ADA. I apologize in advance for the very text-heavy slides. And please note that the first excerpt contains a discussion about workplace discrimination. So this is an excerpt from Leah Seth's essay for ADA 30 in Color. And she talks about the ADA and the way she hasn't seen it change very much at all over the course of her life. And in this excerpt, she mentions a specific instance of workplace discrimination involving her wheelchair. She writes, "When I was still relatively new to the working world, I began using a wheelchair on days when my mobility was especially limited, or days when I knew I would otherwise be spending a lot of time standing. After I mentioned it at work, a white manager told me that I should try not to use it if I knew I would be at a client-facing event. Years later, I realized I should have questioned that request, fought back, or taken it to human resources. But at the time, I was 23 and didn't realize that what they were asking was inappropriate and illegal. The ADA often only works when people with disabilities do their own research and fight their own battles. But for young minorities without a lot of experience who have to deal with racial bias among other biases, losing a job is a risk that may not be worth the fight." Now, Leah Seth goes on to write about how her wheelchair would have been a totally reasonable accommodation. And I think that is worth noting. But what really stood out to me here is the statement that she didn't realize what they were asking was inappropriate, right? She didn't realize it was illegal, but she didn't know it was inappropriate. She didn't know. And that is incredibly common. The reality is that people who are marginalized in society often don't know when they are being subjected to violence, whether it's ableism or anti-Blackness or anti-fatness. It all just feels like part of living life. And in the case of oppressions that are so deeply rooted and poorly understood, like anti-fatness, especially when many fat people themselves come to believe that they deserve that treatment, that having a fat body inherently means you should be changing. And if you don't, then you deserve what you get. How does an anti-discrimination law help them in those cases? If enforcement requires awareness of discrimination, what happens to those who cannot register their treatment as discrimination? And now we'll move on to the second excerpt. As an advance notice, the next passage discusses domestic violence, law enforcement, harassment, and abuse. And I will be moving on to that now. This excerpt, which is much longer, is split on two sides, two different slides. I will read both of them. I encourage everyone to read the full thing. But in T. Floetry's essay for ADA 30 in Color, she discusses her experience trying to get a protection from abuse order after an instance of domestic violence, and her experience as a Black, Indigenous, deaf woman. And I will read the passage now. She writes, I initially did not want to call the police to report the possible harassment because I did not want to expose my personal life to a system I knew would not fully protect me. My family encouraged me to call the police. I hesitated for several days. I received a verbal threat from the abuser that led me to be willing to go to the courthouse. I went to the front desk to request a certified sign language interpreter to explain the event because I wanted to explain my situation in my native language. Writing back and forth would take away the context I wanted to convey in this delicate situation. The security guard told me the court does not provide interpreters. He called the employee to serve me. I demanded an interpreter. I got the "we do not provide interpreters" response again. That was a lie because I knew the city has the list of interpreting agencies. I persisted again. The employee gave me an unpleasant look. I snapped and told her to come back because I was becoming a loose cannon. It did not help that I was terrified and an emotional wreck. My mother called to check on me. It has been 2 hours. I have been sitting and waiting anxiously to be seen. My mother ordered me to give them her phone number. I watched the employee on the phone with my mother with the "I'm gonna get cussed" look. In the midst of this autistic oppression, I was intrigued to know what my mother did. I called my mother again. She said she told them she could not comprehend why the court did not serve her child. She insisted to the employee I have no problems completing the paperwork because I can read and write. She demanded them to give me the paperwork. I was surprised, she told them. Is that what they really thought about me when they first saw me? That I cannot read and write just because I am deaf. So because I am Black, I am deemed illiterate. Because I am not rich, I'm not supposed to be treated properly. 6.75 hours is the time I spent alone in the courthouse to get a temporary protection order simply because I wanted a certified language interpreter to make sure I am not misunderstood and ignored. And that is the end of the excerpt. This account is really full of so many notable things, but I wanted to point out now that T. Floetry has been advocating for her needs as a Black, Indigenous, deaf person since she was a child. And she was 29 when this happened. And despite having those skills and experience and anticipating the violence of the legal system, despite knowing what she is technically entitled to under the law, she still needed the intervention of her mother to get an interpreter from a person who was non-disabled, as far as we know. And she still had to endure being lied to about the availability of interpreters. She still had to endure being discriminated against and the emotional, mental, and physical tolls of that for almost 7 hours. In my experience, when people criticize rights-based approaches, the response is about the need for self-advocacy. right? Legal protections aren't perfect, quote unquote. And so individuals are left to fill in the gaps with their own self-advocacy skills. But if even those who are skilled at self-advocacy struggle with under-enforcement and need outside intervention, what hope should more vulnerable, less skilled, or isolated people have for legal protection? And now I'm going to move to discussing my next steps for the project briefly before closing stuff out. So next steps are basically that I'm going to continue reading and gathering other disability justice materials, including interviews, zines, and possibly social media posts. And I'll also be focusing on finding more criticisms of how the corporatization of disability rights, or how corporations and capitalist entities have influenced disability rights activism. And that focus feels very relevant given how corporations like Dove and pharmaceutical giants like Novo Nordisk are using discourse around weight discrimination and law advocacy to their advantage. And I wanted to close this out by highlighting this quote from Leah Lakshmi Piepzna Samarasina's book, Care Work. The quote says, "A rights framework says that the ADA and other pieces of civil rights legislation give disabled citizens, quote, our rights. We simply state the law and get our needs met. Disability justice says, what if you're disabled and undocumented? What if you think the settler colonial nation we live in is a farce and a hallucination? What if you don't have money to sue an inaccessible business? What if the people giving you accommodations and access technology, or not, are not paid for by the state, but part of your community?" Now, there's a lot there, but I want to emphasize the first and the last sentences. As advocates for disability justice, as disabled people, we know that the idea that we merely have to state our needs to get them met under the law is false. It is mythology. And this mythology serves several functions, including, but not limited to, absolving the state and its institutions of their hands in violence. But what sticks with me most in this precise moment is that this mythology also works to shrink our understanding of what is possible when we decide to question the state. If we believe the rights framework, if we believe the myth that the law ensures our needs are met, we never ever get to the point where we take its power away. We never get to the question in the last sentence. If we believe the myth, if we put everything we have into the myth, we never ask about a future in which accommodations and access happens in our own communities or outside of systems of structural violence. And that's specifically the way that the rights-centered approach determines the limits for what we believe is possible feels especially dangerous to me as a fat, Black, disabled person who will never be safe so long as the state structures my life or the lives of the people I love or the lives of the people I'm in community with. And that is it. Thank you so much for listening. I will pass it along to Ruben.
Hello. This is Ruben. Can everyone see me okay?
We can. Thank you, Ruben.
I want to, okay, I can see self view, so I know you can see me. Am I able to share screen?
You are.
Cool. Let me just shift what's at the front of my thing. I'm going to try this one more time. I'm having a problem with it. Okay, here we go. Can we all see this okay?
Yes.
Awesome. All right, so I will be presenting some preliminary findings from the research project that I've been working on this summer entitled Curative Punishment, California's Sexual Psychopath Law and the Rise of Medico-Legal Reasoning. So California's 1939 sexual psychopathy and psychopathic delinquency laws led to the forced institutionalization of queer people in state psychiatric facilities, a relatively little known chapter of the state's history.
Ruben,
And this,
Ruben,
hello?
this is Emily. Just a quick access note to slow your pace a little as you're reading these slides so our access team can keep up with you. Thank you.
Cool. Lost track of where I was. What's I going to say? So this body of law was part of a nationwide trend between the late 1930s and early 1960s. 26 states and the District of Columbia eventually passed substantively similar laws, and I'll discuss what these laws entailed shortly. And California had one of the highest rates of application of these laws of any state. So all of this left me curious if this body of law created institutional norms or formal legal precedents that facilitated the rise of HIV criminalization laws and eventually contemporary expansions of coercive institutionalization law. So some of my initial priorities in my project were searching for systematic data around how many people were impacted by these laws, more information about conditions at Atascadero, the state hospital that was constructed for people to be involuntarily committed under these laws. I wanted to learn more about what the civil commitment process looked like. I was interested in, as I mentioned earlier, whether there what kinds of formal legal precedents, if any, were created by the sexual psychopathy and psychopathic delinquency laws. And I was also curious as to the timeline of these laws and at what points in time significant changes occurred. I used a range of primary and secondary sources to support this work. So I engaged with Westlaw, which is a major legal research database, as well as historical California code volumes that I accessed at my institution's law library. I reviewed scholarship on so-called sexual psychopathy that was created at the time, as well as contemporary legal scholarship. I conducted interviews with 2 experts on this topic. I reviewed archival sources at the GLBT Historical Society in San Francisco, and I also accessed official state records. So I culled together a lot of information this summer, which I will eventually put together and what will hopefully become a law review article. But here are a couple of the most interesting and salient findings. I'm going to start with findings from my archival work. So as I alluded to earlier, these laws were a decades-long project. So California's sexual psychopathy and psychopathic delinquency laws were enacted in 1939. And to clarify, I didn't establish this clearly earlier, these laws allowed for the indefinite civil commitment of persons deemed a sexual psychopath or a defective or psychopathic delinquent. So the criteria for these designations were very, very nebulous. You could be deemed a sexual psychopath or psychopathic delinquent on the grounds that you were perceived as likely to commit sexual harm or other forms of harm. You did not have to have engaged in those behaviors in any way. You could be sentenced under these laws, even if you are simply suspected of being predisposed to the commission of sexual harm. So the psychopathic delinquency laws were directed towards minors, and the language of the law literally said, like, this, we're using this to create a new category of people who can be coercively institutionalized if they do not fit into any of the existing categories. So this tended to be broad. So then that leads into the first significant step in the evolution of these laws. So the original version of the sexual psychopathy law only allowed for the indefinite civil commitment of people deemed likely to commit sexual violence against children. And in 1945, the criteria for that designation expanded to include people who were deemed likely to commit sexual violence against any member of the population. And more paths to sexual psychopathy commitment were created at that time. And in 1949, which is interestingly, I didn't find this reflected in any secondary sources, a nearly identical mentally abnormal sex offender law was enacted. And this law created an identical civil commitment pipeline for people who were designated mentally abnormal sex offenders, which was a similarly nebulous concept. In 1963, the sexual psychopathy and psychopathic delinquency laws were repealed. And in their place, the mentally disordered sex offender law was enacted to absorb the functions that existed under the earlier laws. And the MDSO law was not repealed until 1981. And even at that time, the repeal of this law did not allow for the release of anyone who had been committed under the MDSO law. It merely ended the practice of committing people under these laws. And for most of this time, not only could you be sentenced to civil commitment if you were entered into this system because someone petitioned for you to be designated in this way, you could also be entered into this system from the criminal legal process if you were facing criminal charges of some kind, and additionally deemed likely to be a sexual psychopath or psychopathic delinquent or mentally disordered sex offender or what have you. You could then be redirected into this system. And there are a lot of shifts in this over the years, but for much of this time that these laws were on the books, you could be sent back to the criminal legal system if you had spent a couple of months under an observation commitment was what they called it, or if you had spent time in multi-year or indefinite commitment. And this allowed for people to be entangled between the criminal, legal, and civil commitment process for years on end. So as I mentioned earlier, I was also curious about the scope of these authoritarian and deeply disturbing laws. There was only one systematic data collection effort that I uncovered in my research, which was the Mentally Disordered Sex Offender in California report, published in 1972. And I can say conclusively that this was the only systematic data collection effort because it says right in the introduction, this was the first report of this kind, and there are no further reports of this kind available. So this was not the product of like a single continuously developed data set. This report was created based on aggregates of data sets from 3 different government bureaus and linking people's identifying information. So I think that's a significant finding unto itself, right? That this whole elaborate civil commitment system happened for decades without an intentional effort at institutional record keeping. I think that's really interesting. So this report covered a 5-year period from 1966 through 1970. And during that time, nearly 2,900 people were designated as possible mentally disordered sex offenders, of whom more than 1,900 were sentenced to indefinite commitment. And among that number, 737 were charged with lewd and lascivious conduct, and 108 were charged with sex perversion, nebulous charges that indicate that this law may have been biased in its application. So there's also an intertwinement with eugenics that I want to continue researching. So in my review of early California Welfare and Institutions Code volumes, I discovered a 1953 law that called upon the Department of Mental Hygiene, which was administering this whole system, to research, quote, the causes and cures of sexual deviation, including homosexuality. And at the same time that this civil commitment system was happening, patients in state facilities could be involuntarily sterilized. That is still allowed under certain conditions today, but at the time that these laws were on the books, you could be sterilized basically for any reason at the discretion of the director of your like locked facility where you were confined. I got distracted. Something broke. I don't know what happened. Did something break? I don't know. I'm not in my apartment. I'm staying in a friend's place right now. Totally lost my train of thought. Anyways, so I'm curious about if there was any interplay between the mandate of the sexual psychopathy laws, the mandate of the 1953 law calling for and allocating state funding to research the causes and cures of homosexuality, and the permission for people in state psychiatric facilities to be involuntarily sterilized. And another important layer of context for all of this is that at the beginning of the 20th century, California had the highest rate of involuntary sterilizations of any state. So this is more of an unfinished thought and set of further research questions than anything else, but I'm curious about how these themes may relate to one another. And here are some of my findings from secondary sources. I think I started speaking around 2:45, now we're at 2:56. So I'll try to button things up in a timely manner. So I spoke with a PhD graduate who wrote his dissertation about the sexual psychopathy laws and the practices at Atascadero State Hospital, which was constructed to fulfill the mandate of these laws. And he asserted to me that these laws were significant insofar as they legitimated the psychological profession within the law, within society generally, and created a role for the psychological profession within the legal system that hadn't previously existed. And I also read a law review article that expressed similar claims and argued that on a nationwide level, the sexual psychopathy laws were significant in terms of how they brought medical reasoning into the legal system. So I mentioned at the beginning of this that I was interested in relationships between three bodies of law. The sexual psychopathy laws, HIV criminalization laws, and contemporary coercive institutionalization law. I did not find any evidence of a formal precedent relationship between these three bodies of law, but I think that the ways in which they all involve medical legal reasoning is a conceptual through line that merits further exploration, and that I will discuss in some paper at some point. The scholar that I spoke to, who I mentioned in my last slide, also emphasized to me that the sexual psychopathy laws and subsequent involuntary commitments and torture of queer people in state psychiatric facilities played an important role in the development of political consciousness among queer activists on the West Coast. So there was one guy in particular, Don Jackson, who organized extensive coverage of these events in the early gay press. And I screenshotted a digital file of an old issue of the Bay Area Reporter where allegations of abuse at Atascadero were covered in graphic detail. And the scholar that I spoke to, Mark McNaughton, also argued that the allegations made in gay newspapers imposed pressure upon the APA to eventually remove homosexuality from the DSM. So he claimed that he didn't find all of these reports to be credible. And I asked him, like, okay, like, on what basis do you believe that? He's like, oh, well, there are discrepancies between doctor and patient's testimony. I'm like, wow, of course there were, right? I didn't have the time this summer to review the like primary sources that I'm like alluding to here. I just had that conversation about this coverage. I'm familiar with the scope because I've like run searches in like old newspaper databases for like Atascadero, this and that, whatever. And it turns up a bunch of results. So I'd like to review that data at some point. I just didn't have the time right now. So all of this takes me to my further research questions. I'm very curious about the outcomes of the 1953 law that called for research into the causes and cures of homosexuality. I'm curious about what can be ascertained from the reported discrepancies between doctor and patient testimony at about events at Atascadero. And I am curious in building out my understanding about the shared role of medical legal reasoning in HIV criminalization law and contemporary coercive institutionalization law, as well as in broader social and legal understandings of queer and trans people. My next steps. So I spoke to a journalist who wrote the long form KQED piece about the life of a survivor of institutionalization at Atascadero. They were super helpful and sent me a massive trove of archival sources, which I will review at some point, not now. I am eager to continue my literature review as well as my research on HIV criminalization and coercive institutionalization law. And I'm hoping to take a writing workshop class in the spring semester. And I would like to use that opportunity to, words, so tired, to draft an article articulating the timeline and significance of the sexual psychopathy and psychopathic delinquency laws, and to submit that for publication in law reviews, maybe later in 2025. I hope some of this was interesting. Thank you for listening, and hopefully this is all coming soon to a law review near you. LOL.
Hey, this is Lotus speaking again. Thank you so much to Mikey and Ruben for those really, really incredible, informative, and dare I say evocative presentations. I know that there's so much that I'm wondering about.
Thank you for sticking around. Thank you for joining us. This has been such an incredible day of just disability crip brilliance. And I am here to bring us home with our final performer block. Up first, we'll have Capria, then Jasenia, and then we will be delighted by the pair of Jamoka and Kedra, followed by a panel. So I will turn it over to Capria to get us started.
Thanks, Alex. My name's Capria. I use they, them pronouns. I am zooming in from New York. I am a light-skinned Black person with curly dark hair swooped over to the side. I'm wearing a rosy pink colored shirt with buttons, and I'm in a room that's an office with a lot of colors on a whiteboard behind me. And I am going to start sharing my slides. All right. When I get excited, I talk fast, but I trust that the crew will let me know if I'm too fast. So This little mini presentation is called Musings on a Theoretical Framework. And just a note here that I am a PhD student studying higher education. And I am in the like pre-dissertation phase. And so just sharing with you all the process on my thinking around how I'm going to approach my dissertation. This session will center the reflection and dreaming I've done so far on a theoretical framework for examining the experiences of disabled queer students of color on college campuses. We will cover a bit of how I've arrived at the topic, some theories that inform how I will approach my dissertation research, and some thoughts on how dreaming this up can help change institutions. You might be wondering, how did I get here? All right, the first way was thinking about research as me search and thinking of writing myself into existence. I've studied higher education for a little while now, and it has been sort of rare that I've come across lots of literature that talks about the experiences of disabled queer students of color all together. We have significant bodies of research that talk about disability and queerness and disability and race, but all three of those things together could be built upon, and I'm hoping to do that, contribute in that way. The second bullet point I have for how I got here is through my experiences in higher education as a practitioner, like working in student services. Had the honor to be a staff advisor for a student group of disabled students, and they were exercising principles of disability justice in the container of their student organizations in the ways that they could be like actualized within higher education. And so I want to be clear here that disability justice outside of the academy looks different than disability justice principles being lifted and inspiring actions within institutions, okay? So we're within institutions, my goal is to take some learnings from disability justice and implement them for change within the structure of the academy / creating new structures within the academy. So that's kind of how I'm thinking about this. And people are supporting these students. I want to say that too. Students just kind of have to get lucky. And I really don't want students to have to rely on getting lucky to find people who can help them through their college journey. And last, but certainly not least, or maybe least, student success metrics. Another reason why I'm here, persistence in graduation. So when students start college, are they being supported enough to continue college and eventually graduate? Because folks don't start college without wanting to finish college, okay? All right, theories that are informing my research. Gonna go through this pretty quickly, just give you the highlights. Multiple dimensions of identity. So I'm using this to think about how, what the influence college has on students in relation to their social identity formation or solidification. One thing I need you to know is that students do not only develop in college. And also, people in general do not need to go to college to fully realize who they want to be in the world, okay? College is just a place that I've decided to focus my interest, but college isn't necessary to develop, okay? I also want to say that colleges, like this theory specifically, is looking at how students are making meaning of their experiences through the filters of outside factors. One of the easiest examples I can go to is that colleges are impacted by things that are outside of colleges. And so quick example is the election, okay, it will have an impact on what happens within colleges and how students feel, okay? So although it's a little silo being an institution, the world is still important to what happens in the institution. Quickly, intersectionality. I know many of us are familiar, but talking about identities do not exist in isolation, nor do systems of oppression and privilege. Ecological systems theory, unique to campuses. Campus is a container, at the same time not cut off from the world or systems of oppression and power. And the environment of a college has an impact on students. And I think about this quickly in just self, others, and society. So how I think about myself, my identity and relationships to others, and my place within society. Closing out, disability justice is so important to this work, and really what I want to focus on in the dissertation: leadership that's coming up out of students' groups and interactions, interdependence, how they rely on each other, recognizing wholeness, how they're validating each other, commitment to cross-disability solidarity and things like hybrid offerings in college, collective access, making accessible spaces, and intersectionality across different offices and programming with intention. My last piece I'll say here to close out is that I am interested in shaking it up. I do believe that I can help work to change structure and policy within higher education to make it work for disabled queer college students of color. Thank you.
All right, I think I'm next. Hi everyone, my name is Jasenia. I'm just going to take a moment to get myself set up. And share my screen. Okay, one moment, I'm almost ready. Oh, and yes, for my own accessibility needs, I'm setting a timer. All right, welcome everyone. My name is Jasenia. I go by she or any pronouns. I am a Indigenous Latina woman wearing pink glasses and black hair that is shaved on the sides and in a bun. I'm wearing Indigenous North American Native earrings and a blue dress and gray hoodie. I'm sitting in a living room. On the screen, you'll see various screenshots of past virtual protest events. That is the project that I'm proposing and working for the next year to grow. One of the images reads Free Palestine, virtual protest, with a list of other ways to support. Another reads virtual protest in black and red letters with a speaker from a rally with the captions, Arrest Netanyahu. Another reads long COVID awareness, and yet another is an image from a promotional video where I am promoting the first event, as well as a couple more screenshots of similar events where we're having conversations on TikTok with people who are very familiar with the different ongoing genocides. So this is a little bit about me. I am queer, Native, Latina, neurodivergent, and first generation to the Americas. I work on several different projects and collaborations, including Neurospicy Networking, One Free Community, Neurodivergent for Community, and Calling Up Justice. The images on the screen are screenshots of different infographics that we've created for each of these organizations. Oops, I went a little too far. One moment. So values and impact. We'll start with visual descriptions. There are 3 screenshots of the protests that we have had in the past. All of them have a teal background with the OFC logo and long COVID awareness on the screen. And the different images share resources and an image of the DC reflecting pool with protesters on the screen. Virtual protests provides an opportunity for us to connect with like-minded people, learning about pressing issues, and participating in movement work that seeks to bring about positive change. We work on amplifying our voices and making a difference in the struggle for justice and freedom. I do these as a way to create access to movement work. Virtual protests are created to give care workers, parents, disabled people, and all kinds of people who can't go to a protest in person, whether that's because of safety or disability or any other reasons. They can't physically go to in-person protests, or maybe they don't even have a protest happening near them. They can't travel to in-person protests. So we created a way. I did this in collaboration with a bunch of other people, and every time I produce one of these, it's a different group of people. Some of them are from One Free Community, some of them are from my TikTok audience. Sometimes I partner with Calling Up Justice, sometimes I partner with a bunch of different people. So every time we do these, we are trying to bring awareness to the topic that is being discussed. These are emergent and happen really quickly. In fact, I just found out about one yesterday, and I'm going to talk about that a little more later. So this is an event, and each one can be different. We've had a bunch of different formats for these events, but on all of them, we try to ensure that we are learning about the actions that people can take. We amplify the voices of the people that are being discussed, and we try to show people that in every way they have, or in any way that they have to support, is a great way to fight genocide, right? Everybody can find their role, no matter how big or small, that is accessible and attainable for them to participate in movement work. So how it works, you can go to any of these linked websites. They'll be shared in after this event or in the chat, hopefully. You can go to callingupjustice.com/virtual-protest or any of our socials for One Free Community. You can join them from your home, your phone, or your computer. Like, share, comment. Community rush, that's where we send our audience to a person who's at the protest to share and like their live if they're live streaming. We do group calls to action, such as ResistBot, or sending people to find resources to contact their local representatives. And we learn about other ways to participate in activism. We also offer people an opportunity to engage live rather than just watching a stream in isolation. This is an opportunity for people to meet in the comments, engage with each other, and share resources that we may not know about and can share with the engaged audience. Where these happen is going to depend on who's hosting them. Sometimes we've had them on TikTok Live, we've had them on YouTube, we've done them in Twitch, and we've done them in GatherTown. Oh, I don't think I did a visual description to this image, so I went back one moment to give a visual description. One image shows a link that goes to screenshots of, it's a Padlet, which is a website kind of corkboard for links and images. And You can go to the virtual protest Padlet to see images and videos of past events and promotions. And this other second screenshot is a screenshot of the virtual protest happening that happened on July 24th, which was a mass protest at the Capitol, and it was labeled the Red Line protest. And this image shows protesters at the Capitol holding up signs, wearing keffiyehs, and protesting in DC. So what's next for this project? We've already been producing virtual protests in different iterations of it and other similar programs. So you can go to the website link to find out about future events. You can sign up for the newsletter. You can attend events. My goal for this next year is to create templates for other organizations and groups and mutual aid and anybody to be able to replicate a similar process and programming for their communities. That way to make it more accessible and give it a wider reach. I also would like to create and produce workshops that would allow for people to come and get training and watch us produce an event from start to finish so that they can then turn around and do it themselves. This leans into sustainability. We want it to be more than just me, one person, pushing this kind of content out and giving this kind of accessibility to protesting. We want to grow the events, grow our reach. There is a lot of suppression happening on all of our socials for all of the anti-genocidal programming that we provide. So we are trying to bring in more people to share, like, and support this project, as well as learn how to do it themselves, like create your own. And this is about cross-solidarity, cross-movement solidarity, cross-disability solidarity. We want to network with other groups to create more robust systems of people who can produce these in emergent ways. We want to expand our reach and continue to cover more and more suppressed issues. So that's it for me. Thank you so much. I will be continuing to produce another one this Monday, March 19th, for a protest happening in Chicago. And if you want to sign up, you can go to callingupjustice.com and search virtual protest. Thank you.
Hey, party people, it's your baby girl, Jumoke. I'm here with the ever lovely, ever fabulous Kiki. So we will be doing our section together. So I'd like, first of all, to introduce myself and my work. If the slides could be brought up, please. I feel like I might be saying that to the ether. Oh, here we go.
Oops.
Okay, Kiki will be going first. Yeah, I'm so sorry. You've been sacrificed. Kiki, take it away.
Oh, wow. That's quite all right. Surprise, surprise. Hi, everyone. My name is Kiki. Kedra Cheney is my full name. My pronouns are she, her. I'm a Black woman with red cat eye glasses and curly hair, and I'm wearing a pink Black Barbie t-shirt. And this is my project. It's called Control, a digital archive of disabled Black women's activism. This project aims to collect, document, and archive the online activism and cultural work of Black disabled women and femmes in social movements and subcultures from the early 2000s to the present. You can see the URL, there's nothing at it right now. Hopefully within the next 3 years, you'll see some content there, a full searchable archive. And the archive will be hopefully searchable, available to the public and searchable by date, content type, and also name. And you can move on to the next slide, please. Oh, things got moved around. Okay, you're back on board, Jamoke.
Yes, we completely planned this. So my name is Jumoke. My pronouns are she, her. I'm a brown-skinned Black woman wearing a mauve t-shirt, and I've got short bob-styled micro locks. So my project is entitled The Impact of Media Representation of Disabled Black Womanhood and How This Informs Their Sense of Self and Community. So a little bit about myself. So I'm a Nigerian-born British force of nature. I could be called Gail because I'm a force of nature. Um, Terrible joke. We're moving on. So I co-founded an organization called the Triple Cripples, which looks at the intersections of race, gender, and ability, especially as it pertains to the media representation or lack thereof for those that are at the very least triply marginalized. So this title is actually my master's thesis. So I'm currently wrapping up my master's right now, and this project is a continuation of that. So for my master's thesis, I'm looking at UK-based disabled Black women, and for the fellowship project, I would like to speak to US-based disabled Black women. I'm hoping to center the experiences of disabled Black women within media, and this includes all media, both traditional, social, and digital. I'm looking to engage in 6 paid interviews using a variety of CRIP methods so as to make them as accessible as possible. So either doing it as a Zoom conversation, having it as a questionnaire, as long form voice notes back and forth. So whatever is best suitable for the person and makes it most accessible. This research that I'm doing for my master's and also for this fellowship project is part of a larger goal towards and beyond PhD. And I'm really looking to focus on centering the narratives and the experiences of disabled Black women, starting from the point of media, but branching out to how this impacts them, their community, their sense of self, and so much more. And understanding that the media can be used as a tool, seeing ourselves being made real, but it can also be a barrier when your needs are not being considered, when folks aren't trying to work from the margins and go in. And so many people are left behind and aren't falling through the cracks, but rather being pushed. So if you would like to find out more and get involved, please do contact me via email, which is fellowjumoke@outlook.com. That's FELLOWJUMOKE@outlook.com. Thank you so much. Back to you, Kiki.
Thank you, Jamoke. So continuing on about the Controlled Digital Archive, it's a planned 3-year project. And what I plan to be doing in this archive is collecting content from Black disabled women who do Twitter or X hashtag campaigns, any short social media videos, including TikTok and Instagram Reels, podcasts in the form of sound files or transcripts, online zines or educational publications or training publications or toolkits that Black disabled women are doing online, and also any content from blogs or websites that Black disabled women would be creating online. I'm now in year 1 of this project. I'm working on a foundational document that'll have collection and acquisition policies, consent policies for collecting people's personal information, interview questions to help give context to what I'm collecting, identifying a starting list of 40 sources that I'd reach out to collect content from, intake questions and like trying to get questions together to get some of that context that will help illuminate some of the work that is being collected. This past month, I've spent a lot of time connecting with other community archivists that are doing the similar work of creating archives of smaller communities. And I'm also looking for potential partners to collaborate with, to possibly volunteer, folks who might want to participate or have their information collected for the archive. I wanted to stress this isn't a research project. This is a digital community archive. My hope is that it is publicly available, but it's also collectively held and owned by the people that it's representing. Like this is for us, by us. It's not something that I am looking to own by myself. I'm looking for it to be owned by a particular community of Black women, disabled activists. There aren't many places where digital history is publicly held. And those places, when they do exist, don't often include or center Black women, and they definitely don't center Black disabled women. And so the goal of this project is to address that and to maybe be a response and answer to that. If you're interested in getting involved, you can contact me at Kedra or Kiki Cheney at kedra@gmail.com. And I'm looking forward to getting into some questions with you, Jamoke.
Yes, I would like to do that as well. I'll kick us off with the first question. So both our projects aim to center the lives, work, and everything in between of disabled Black women. In which ways has your own experience shaped the work that you're looking to embark upon?
I definitely wanted to like chop it up with you about this because I feel like we have similar backgrounds in terms of like being extremely online, having like working and playing and just having a very, if not completely public online existence, like interacting a lot. So I worked in digital organizing and communications at nonprofits and social movement organizations for almost 20 years now. And also as a writer. And so I've seen the many iterations of Black women kind of leading the way in online culture and activism and thinking and community building. And two books really inspired that: Black Digital Feminisms by Catherine Steele and Black Disability Politics by Shami Shalk. I read those two books and I started thinking a lot about like what it would mean for the future if somebody wanted to collect the impact of Black women online and what would be there, if anything, to prove our impact. And so I started to feel an urgency around being able to collect this information and to have it kind of safely held and not either erased or misinterpreted by people who weren't there or who aren't us. But I would love to know your answer to this as well.
Not you flipping the script. Okay.
Just a little bit. We don't have
much. My experience has certainly shaped the work that I'm looking to embark on. So as I'd mentioned, the Triple Cripples is something that I co-founded with one of the many loves of my life, Kim Oliver, shout out Kim. And my approach to the creation of the Triple Cripples was just watching TV, taking in so much media and recognizing that there was something missing and not immediately having the language, but recognizing that there was something missing. And as I got older and learning more about the media and studying it, I recognized that it was me and those that lived life like me that was missing. And that's why I'm so interested in it, because for me, it's, yes, I am doing a research project, but it means so much more to me than something to study. Like, this is also my lived reality. So yeah, me search, as Capria says. Shout
Yes,
out Capria.
I love that term.
Yes.
Yeah, I guess I can ask my question for you if you're cool. So yeah, I was thinking a lot about trust building when it comes to interviewing, especially with like marginalized groups, and we're so used to being in a position of being misinterpreted or having our trust be broken or used against us when it comes to having our stories be told. And so I was wondering how you approach trust building when you're coming up with your interview questions. And if you find it to be either easier or harder to do that when you're talking to our own community. It's folks like us, you feel more of a sense of responsibility to really be able to build that trust because it is us. It's a sacred bond.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's something that I've certainly experienced while doing the interviews for my MA thesis. There was a part of me that very much had the academy in my ear. Be professional, be professional. Like, you gotta have this very clear cut line. You are the researcher, they are the researchee. And what I found was that it was kind of a double-edged sword. It was easier being able to speak with people because I, first of all, had a focus group of the people that I would be interviewing where I had created the questions and I got their feedback and we co-produced the questions. So that was really important to me. And throughout having the interviews, writing up the transcript, fixing any typos, and letting them have a look at it and ensure that if there was something, perhaps maybe they got a bit more vulnerable than they would have liked, that they'd like to be removed, they're not comfortable with it, might be a safety issue, or they just didn't want to divulge as much as they did, and giving them that opportunity and paying them for their time. And as I was going along, so I had 6 interviews. As I was going along, I felt a lot freer and was able to essentially have a conversation like we are having now and getting the rich data, but also just being able to talk to people and actually having somebody listen. And it wasn't just for the goal of me getting my degree and then leaving, but recognizing that I'm very much in this as well. And my research is richer for them having been a part of it. So in terms of trust, I think it made it harder but in a good way, because I recognized the weight of that responsibility, and it's not something that I take lightly, as opposed to being the outside kind of like looking in. As yours is more of an archival project, how do you deal with trust?
I'm still really thinking a lot about that right now because there's such a history of archives and museums, really exploiting marginalized groups. And so I think that's why I'm really looking at this as a community archive. Like I'm not an archivist. I'm very much not an archivist. I'm new to this. But I want to be true to this. So I'm really looking to see what models exist in community archives and see some of the processes that are, ethical collection and, that really understand consent and really incorporating those into how we ask the questions, how collection is even done. There's an existing program that's called Documenting the Now. It's based around collecting archive information about Black Lives Matter from Twitter. And I've been really looking at a lot of what they have been doing in the past couple of years as a template for moving forward on this, understanding, centering the folks that are going to be a part of it and saying like, this is our collective story, as opposed to being held by some big places that's going to tell your own story for you. It's a place to hold our collective narratives together and keep them all protected.
Yeah, Thank you so much for that. Okay, so my last question for you. So both my research and your archive project kind of they focus on us ensuring that we're not being erased from our own stories and trying to avoid and resist and push back against a symbolic annihilation. So your archive of the digital and online activism of Black women makes me think of the importance of physicality within the work that people do. So can you speak to the fragility of having digital artifacts, like you said, that can just get erased and removed?
Yeah, that whole thing about the line about the internet being forever is such a lie. There's so much that is so that so easily can be disappeared through like link rot, the idea that websites get shut down and that the links that go to them lead to nowhere for a lot of articles that archives like for example, MTVnews.com got shut down a couple months ago. And so you have like decades worth of journalism about pop culture that just doesn't exist anymore, that can't be accessed or referenced. And so, you know, I don't think people think about digital artifacts as needing to be archived or held because of this idea that it exists forever, but like that stuff is owned by folks. It's owned by millionaires. It's owned by billionaires who, you know, if they don't see value in it, they will get rid of it. So it does become an effort for folks who want to see digital media held and kept somewhere. It's kind of on the folks who feel like it's important to do that work because we can't look to corporate owners to do that and to find valuable what we find valuable in our narratives because they won't.
Yeah, yeah, no, absolutely. And yeah, because in any sort of media, whether digital, traditional, social, if we ourselves are not being made real on these platforms, if these people don't exist, then there's no money to be made here. Why would I invest in that? So it definitely has to be a by us, for us, with us, always in mind, because we're the only ones that kind of care enough to do that work and to hold that work in treasury. So are there any last remarks that you would like to make before we round this off?
I think what the reason why I wanted to connect with you on this and do this together is I feel like we're making similar offerings to the same community, to say like, hey, we're all trying to build narratives and histories together. And I just really, you know, appreciated being able to talk with you about your project. And like, I'm hoping that it's the beginning of more synergy in the future between these two projects, because I feel like they're like mirrors of each other. And it's just exciting that we got to do this project, this fellowship together and talk about that. So
Yes,
thank you.
no, definitely. Yes, thank you. And I certainly feel the same way with my little millennial heart. I definitely think both our work will be richer for us and our projects being in conversation with one another. So it's been really great sharing with you all. So I'm Jumoke. Yes, thank you all so much for having us.
Hey y'all, this is Alex speaking. Thank you to everyone in that performance block for sharing their magic. I made a little hosting boo-boo when I forgot to name the theme of this block. This session was under the umbrella of Crip Conscious Community Building. And I just want to give a shout out to Kiki and Jamoke for taking up my invitation to break the form a little bit. The way that you two modeled being in conversation with one another. Yeah, just feels very like you're doing the work, right? We're getting to witness it as a facilitator, interviewer, just hearing your questions and the way you hold space for each other is very heartening for me. So thank you for that possibility model. We've got Dr. Baby Girl still on camera and spotlit right now because she's courageously volunteered to take the first question during this panel activity. And I want to invite the audience, if anybody has, I see people offering affirmations. If you have questions, the Q&A function is still available. And while you do that, Dr. Baby Girl, this session is talking about crip conscious community building. It's always good, in my experience, to ground in definitions or confirm shared language. So how do you define crip community building, and how might it differ from disability community building?
Thank you for those questions, Alex. So how might I define crip community building? I think for me, the differences that I've been able to see between crip community building and disability community building is one that, so crip community building seems to be rooted in disability justice, whereas disability community seems more to be rooted in disability rights. So even from the language in and of itself, like to be, I'm a crip, you're a crip, we're a crip. Like this is kind of like the language that we can use, and it's for us, it's by us, for those that want to, of course. But I see it as something that's really rather expansive, something that's not so tied down and bogged down in policies and legalese and legality. But in terms of community building, I think that trying to build community with other people, just because we're both disabled or we're all disabled, doesn't necessarily mean that we have the same ideas and attitudes towards certain things. And I'm going to quote myself and make sure that I don't misquote myself. So just because we both need the lift doesn't mean we are going to the same floor. So to be in community with somebody, it's not enough for me that somebody is just disabled. Like if you're phobic, I don't want to be in community with you. If somebody's being transphobic, queerphobic, if they're being ableist, bringing their own internalized ableism and kind of like sparing that out. Racism, we know, is a huge problem within the disability movement. So recognizing that there are areas in which we might align, but I might not necessarily call you community or see us together in that space if there are certain people that you don't see as valuable just because of the way that they experience life. I'm done speaking.
Panel, is there anything that you would add to what Chimoke just offered, or would you like me to go to the next question? All right. And just for the folks at home, I need you to know when Jamoke said that line about the lift in our prep, the scream I scrumped. Wow, that took all skin folk or not kinfolk to new heights. Relatedly, I see Capria has joined us. You mentioned in your session intersectionality, which has gained a lot of traction in recent years as a buzzword in these conversations. I'm sure based on some of the expressions that you are gifting us with, we could have the whole other panel conversations around that topic itself. For as fundamental as intersectionality is in relationship to crip conscious community building, like Jamoke said, disability alone is not enough to build this more heightened or depth of community. What do you think people misunderstand about intersectionality in relationship to community building?
Thank you for that question, Alex. I definitely agree on the buzzword aspect of it. I think of like when I go to places and they have like pins that you can like pin on your clothes, and they have ones that say intersectionality, but like no kind of context or anything. It's just like a pin. I know. It's just like a pin that says intersectionality. And I'm just like, who, why? I don't know. And so I think people get wrong that intersectionality only applies to like certain identities. I think over the years, since the great year of 1989, when the definition hit the press, that like so much has expanded and people have built on that work. And we've incorporate like going back to Black feminist thought and like the creation, the emergence of that term, and like how it's morphed over time and then gained popularity in a certain context, and now is like part of common like language that folks are using in all kinds of spaces. I think the work of easing access, inclusion of disabled folks is everyone's work. I think people use it as like a way to get out of doing that kind of work because they're like, oh, but I don't have any intersectionality. It's like a phrase people say. And I'm like, what does that mean? And so we do a little education, but then within the relationship piece, we can easily connect other disability justice principles like cross-disability solidarity, cross-movement organizing. And I'm also reminded of one of our earliest meetings as Emerge Fellows when Alex, we were doing introductions and Alex is facilitating and had us like introduce ourselves with like and phrase it as causes we are in solidarity with. And I had never like heard anyone like frame that way. I just knew like ally wasn't the word I wanted to be using all the time, but like solidarity to me is like showing up in a different way, more active, more engaged than slapping on a pin that says I'm an ally. I yield my time back to the floor.
You better stop. This Model UN, I'm dying. Yeah, that pin allyship reminds me. I always use that GIF of Kris Jenner being like that, you're doing amazing, sweetie. You know, it's like those allies in the back being like, keep putting yourself on the front lines. I'm gonna retweet that. The idea of cross movement solidarity, cross disability solidarity is a perfect segue to our next question for Jasenia. Jasenia, what are some of the opportunities and tensions that we've seen in doing intersectional, cross-disability, and cross-movement focused community building, either through your Emerge projects or other work that you've done in community?
Thank you, Alex. I am hyperverbal autistic, so I can go on. So I wrote down my answer because I thought it would be helpful for me to stay focused. So one of the things I see is tension. When I see tension, I see when people come as they are, which we want them to do in wholeness. Sometimes that means that they come with a trauma response or in a reactive state. We're seeing that a lot right now in the online spaces that if anyone spent any time in the last week on social media, they've seen that. Right now we're in a phase in our collective unlearning where disability justice values will help us deal with the infighting that we're seeing right now. We have the opportunity to show grace and model how to move in community. A lot of people have never even had an experience of being in community. When we center cross movement solidarity and cross disability solidarity to build stronger networked communities, we build on our most valuable and most abundant resource, which is relationship. Fear of open conflict can also lead to a lot of unintended harm, and we need to make sure that we're protecting our sustainability and supporting our communities so that we can continue to fight for this liberation together. We all need space to learn and space to heal, and discerning when to do that and where to do that and whose role it is to help support that along the way is going to be make a big difference in building community. So that's my answer.
am checking the chat to confirm that I'm understanding. I saw there's somebody asked a question, Denise asked a question in the Q&A function, sort of related to that. Jasenia, I'm not sure if you would like to add any more specifics, or from anyone on the panel, if you want to address this question. I can also read it aloud.
Yes, please read it out loud and I will respond.
Thank you. So Denise asks, how can we create opportunities for persons with varying disabled conditions to meet each other socially and be able to interact and get to know each other's struggles and be able to support and encourage each other and form alliances for social justice? This is including both physical and mental health barriers.
This is the very vital question, and I'm glad you asked it. It is unfortunately, and I think a few of the fellows mentioned this earlier, it falls on us, the disabled community, to do the work of advocating for ourselves and for our fellow disabled community members. So one of the things that I feel I have been inspired to do by many of the people who I have been following and informally mentored by in the last couple of years is to demand the things that we need and be loud about it, not just from the people in your life, but the places you want to spend time in, the places that you want to be in physical space with. So if you have one or two people with you and making an email campaign or contacting the local theater to create a masked required day or screening of a single play or show, or supporting mask blocks or supporting groups that are out here advocating for this work. There are people out here doing it, and the hard part is for us to find them, connect with them, and be able to support them. They're tired from doing this work, and they're also disabled and doing care work and community care. So if there's any spoons that you have to even just send an email or attend a meeting virtually or ask for virtual access to events that you want to attend and can't, and then they're not offering it anymore. Those are ways that you can participate. I could go on for a while, but I wanted to give anyone else an opportunity to answer as well.
This is Alex speaking. Curious, Capriya, Kiki, Jamoke, do you have anything that you want to add to what Jasenia offered, or yeah.
Yes, I think so. There, this is Capri again, picked up the mic. This question that Jasenia was responding to about some of the opportunities and tensions that we've seen in doing intersectional, cross-disability, cross-movement focused community building, and just thinking about the Emerge cohort experience. And I remember this being a question very early on, and we, have navigated it, but like when our access needs are like tension with one another, and like how do we navigate that? And I think like so much of my experience in the cohort has been like learning how to be in disability community and like Crip communities specifically, and like, what does that mean? How do we move through it? How do we get our questions out? How do we respond? Like, all the things. And how do we get like creative and inventive with the ways that we can like shape the space and make sure that as best we can, we get folks like needs met for their body minds. Kiki, I think you're up next.
Hi. Yeah, I wanted to quickly piggyback off of something that you said, Capriya, about access frictions, and it was a conversation I actually had, I think yesterday, with my fellowship mentor, and the idea that access frictions are not necessarily conflicts that need to be solved. We're so used to being in a world that sees when there is friction or tension, that it's something that it's based around conflict, and it's like problem solving. It's like Scandal, having somebody come in and fix something that is broken, as opposed to like tensions or frictions that maybe can be soothed or smoothed. And we're in such a, an environment where like there's always got to be somebody who is punished. It's about, if there's a friction, then somebody's doing something wrong, and then there's the person who is punished, and then this person who will get like justice from being punished. And I think disability, being in this cohort and being in like a space that practices disability, justice, inclusion, and just living together, like seeing access tensions and frictions and not being afraid to address them directly, as opposed to saying like, this is a problem that we need to solve, and somebody needs to be like shown the door or told that they're wrong or told that they need to change. And looking at it, it's messy, but it's not messy in a bad way. And being able to pivot, and being able to pivot with grace and humor and not shame. I feel like to see that in action and to see that in practice in the past few weeks has been so that it's changed the way that I've thought about how I want to do that kind of community building in all sorts of different spaces, within disability spaces, and just, Black women spaces, wherever. It just showed me a different way.
Thanks for that, Kiki. Capriya back here on the mic. I just want to shout out like the Emerge team, and just like how thoughtful everything was. Special shout out to Lotus, who was our access coordinator for the summer and for the fellowship experience, and just like rolling with it. Like, we were encountering things all the time that was like, oh, we need to figure this out like in real time. Like, how do we do that? And like being very transparent about the process and like including us in that, like, it was just amazing. So thank you, Lotus.
This is Alex speaking. I will wholeheartedly echo that love and that affirmation. In the vein of learning out loud, last year, the Emerge team was 2. It was just Emily and I, and scrappy as we are, the many competing needs of the fellows, of the systems that we were in, of the program itself, really like tapped our capacity, and we recognized the ways that the fellows of that first cohort were significantly impacted, right? Both like physically, spiritually, mentally, emotionally, by that. And so the dawn of the age of Lotus this year has just been such a revelation for how I've been able to facilitate crip conscious community building, because I was able to really focus on like my role and allow Lotus to shine in that. And when we were able to do those things in tandem and in concert. I just witnessed you all also be able to do that because of how Lotus was routinely modeling the calm, kind, spacious, curious, patient delivery of access needs and accessible culture. And that's something I'll take with me through this experience. So on that very, ushy gushy lovey note, I would love to invite the panel to offer the audience a closing thought, statement, anything related to CRIP conscious community building or your time in the fellowship today, and then I will wrap us up.
Hi all, this is Jasenia. Thank you so much. The Emerge Fellowship team has done an amazing job of co-creating this space with us, co-creating this symposium, and it has just been a wonderful experience to be in CRIP community with these emergent fellows. And I just really wanted to, my final thoughts were, everyone has a place in building our future, and what we're doing is looking for that place and the people who will help support us find that place and do it together. And that it requires bravery and creativity and imagining a future where we all thrive. So that's all I wanted to share. Thank you so much for having us in this fellowship.
I'll go next. This is Kiki speaking. I just wanted to say that I think coming into this experience, having complicated feelings about the term scholar activist and feeling very like, I don't know if it was even imposter syndrome. I almost a rejection of the idea of being a scholar activist, because I just didn't feel like that was my identity. But being in this cohort and being a part of the fellowship kind of pushed against the idea of a scholar activism as an identity in the first place, that it's a practice. And seeing folks in the practice of their scholar activism while holding all of these other identities, all of these other things that they are, that make us who we are, and learning together in this space was a really beautiful thing. Just something that I had longed for many years, but didn't really know could exist in this space without having to go to a university or whatever to make it happen, like formally. And so I just have such appreciation and respect and awe for everybody involved, the fellows, the wonderful coordination team, just everybody brought this wonderful spirit of trust and learning and growth and practice together. And so I just want to say thanks to everybody. I'm done speaking.
Hello all, it's Jamak here. Certainly want to echo what everybody else has been saying. It's been really lovely as the only Brit in the village, looking directly at you, Mikey. But it's been great to learn and be held within such an expansive space and recognizing that it is not that it is not enough to just be disabled as an identity and using, kind of like waving it as a card. It's something that we have to lean into and to practice and recognize that we are in this struggle with so many others out there. Like there are so many things happening in the world in different corners of the world in which people are being made disabled, that it is imperative that we, in the work that we are doing in the corner in which we are able to light, that we recognize and fight for their disability justice as well, like in Palestine, in Congo, in Haiti, in Sudan, in West Papua, all over the world. Like, this is also part of the work that we are supposed to be doing, and being in solidarity with one another means doing so on a global scale as well. So shout out all of you for allowing this alleged Brit into the fellowship. I can certainly say hand on heart that I'm richer, and I've learned so much just from having been in there. So I can't wait to continue the rest of it into 2025. And speaking.
This is Capria. I have a box of tissues not far from me. Okay, I'm getting misty-eyed over here. I just want to say I just feel an immense amount of like gratitude for this experience. And I think I shared with the cohort before, like I'm in so many spaces where I'm like the one holding space and like the one that's making sure folks' access needs are met. And like when we started the fellowship, the question is like, do you have any access needs we should be aware of? And I was like, oh, wait, me? Like, I don't have to do, I don't have to do the work to like make it happen. Someone's like caring for me in that way. Like a team of people are caring for me in that way and about me in that way. So I think one of my biggest learnings from this experience has been like the way I am like in community with other people and like the possibilities around like everything doesn't have to feel hard. And you don't have to feel like you're the only one who's committed to this or committed to other people. Like people are also committed to you. Yeah, just thank you.
Wow, y'all. You know, Capria, if you can pass those tissues through the computer, I think I've got a twig or a branch or something in my eye. I don't know what it is, but wow, I am so grateful for y'all. I want to resist my urge to do my Oprah moment that I tend to do here in these experiences, and just say that Lotus earlier mentioned this is a dream job. I am sure if you tuned in for any or all of this today, you know that these folks have shared with me so much joy and light that this absolutely has been a dream job. Very grateful to Emily and Lotus for contributing to that. Really want to express deep, deep gratitude to our funder, the Mellon Foundation, particularly our program officer, Carolyn Dinshaw. These dollars are not going to waste. We are absolutely investing in the future of disability studies and scholar activism, and these folks are undeniably a part of the future of that. If there's any testament to the power of building Crip community virtually, I hate to brag, but I've been having some of the best laughs today, just kikiing with these folks in the digital green room that we have. So stay tuned for our newsletter. Contact info for all of these people will be available. So that way, if you want to get in touch to invest more in their work, to be more in community with them, to just get to witness their brilliance, please stay tuned. I could go on, but I shan't, because I'll just keep going. These folks, they're it. And this is the end of the culminating end of year 2, another year of incredible scholar activism. We've got more time with them throughout the program year, and we'll have applications open again in the fall for our final year, for year 3. So if you know anyone interested, please recommend. We would love to have them and support them on their journeys. For now, that's me, Glamputee, signing off. Bye-bye.